Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Board of Commissioners meeting for January 9th, 2012. I am chairing this evening's meeting because our newly elected president, Bill Spingler, has had a death in his family. Our thoughts go out to him, and we send him our very sincere condolences to him and his family. We're going to go ahead and start out with public participation. The public is welcome to come up and share their comments and discussion, but please note that you can come up during the meeting to comment on any item on the agenda while we're talking about it before we vote. So do I have any public participation tonight before the meeting? Seeing none, we'll move right along. I'd like to announce that we had an executive session preceding this Board of Commissioners meeting. All commissioners were present except Bill Spingler. We discussed matters of personnel, litigation, and real estate. Next, we have an update on the open space plan. There's been a subcommittee of the Open Space Committee working on updating our open space plan. The current plan dates back to 1991. Tonight we have, I think, Cheryl Tumola going to speak to us and give us some good news about that work and a quick update. Cheryl?
Good evening. To refresh your memory, this process to update the Township's 20-year-old, outdated, and inadequate open space plan was begun in April of 2010, at which time the Board of Commissioners appointed 9 individuals representing the Open Space Comprehensive Plan, Implementation, Park and Rec, Planning Commission, EAC, and Garrett Hill. Since that time, the Steering Committee has researched RFPs from other communities, compiled a list of stakeholders, and prepared and submitted a grant application to the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. The members of our subcommittee include Gayla McCluskey, who's here with us tonight, and Susan Byrne, who is also here with us tonight, Steve Palantonio, Ann Poulin, Pat Gillen, Skip Kunda, and me. We are also grateful to individuals who have been involved along the way, without whom we would not be here, including John Fisher, Julia Hurl, Ann Albright, and Rick Barker. It is our hope that our work will result in a more transparent and reliable framework for future open space decisions, as urged by the CBFAC. A new plan should allow us to update our long-range planning and reassess our priorities as encouraged by our comprehensive plan. An up-to-date plan, which conforms with our comp plan, will put us in more favorable position when applying for future grants. To that end, we are pleased to announce that we have been awarded the DCNR grant we applied for in April of 2011. Now our real work will begin. We will be preparing an RFP for a consultant this month and begin reaching out to stakeholders and soliciting input from citizens. Over the next 2 months, stakeholders will be invited to join the process by attending meetings. We encourage all citizens to get involved in this long-awaited effort. Notice of our next meeting will be posted on the Township website and announced at each Board of Commissioners meeting. We're having trouble finding space on our agenda, space in this building to have any meetings. So, but that's my presentation. I'm very happy about the grant, and I can't wait to get started. And I don't think our committee members can either, Gayla and Susan, right? Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the whole committee for all the work you've put in so far, but mostly for all the work that you have ahead of you.
Yes, indeed.
This is just so sorely needed to update this plan, and it's thrilling that we got the grant from DCNR. So thanks again, and we look forward to hearing continued progress.
Thanks for your support.
All right, next we have an application for waiver for the room rental fee. It is for the Carol Axelrod Memorial Blood Drive, and I believe we have either Michelle or Danielle Skolnick, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, here to talk a little bit about this.
Hi, I'm Michelle Skolnick, and some of you may remember that I actually spoke before the Board of Commissioners at the end of September because our family was about to hold a blood drive in October. My mother passed away from multiple myeloma, which is an incurable cancer of the blood and bone marrow, in 2008. And for the last year of her life, she was dependent on blood transfusions. And those transfusions allowed her to spend an extra year with her family. She was able to celebrate her 60th birthday, see her only grandchild turn 3 years old, and just celebrate many happy occasions with us. And it was memories that we treasure. After she passed away, we wanted to help other families in similar situations, so we organized a blood drive in her memory. That blood drive has been held every year since she passed away at Lankenau Medical Center in Wynwood, which is where she received her transfusions. Now, last summer and into the fall, in order to try to encourage more participation in blood drives in general and raise awareness about the need for blood donation, we had the opportunity to participate in some community programs here in Radnor Township, which is where we live. And we had some very positive feedback from residents, but they told us that because the blood drive was about 20 minutes away, they weren't sure they'd be able to make it. We had our most successful blood drive ever at Lankenau in October. We collected over 200 units of blood over the course of 2 days. And that success and the feedback we had received from residents here motivated us to try to hold our first blood drive in Radnor Township this spring. So that is why the application is before you. We're excited at the opportunity to hold a blood drive here, and we look forward to having many township residents come out and donate blood.
Thank you. Bob, do we have any staff recommendation on this?
We recommend the approval of the waiver.
Okay. And does anybody want to move for the approval?
I'll move for the approval.
I just have a question, Bob. When the township does its own blood drive, is it held in this room or do they do it in the truck outside?
In this room right here.
Okay.
Do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
And do we have any commissioner comment? Any public comment? I'll call the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All against say no. That carries 6-0. So
Thank you very
much
much.
for coming.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to move right into the committee reports. Commissioner Curley, would you like to introduce the items under community
Sure.
development?
I move the approval of Certificate of Appropriateness, HARB 2011-25 for 310, 214 Orchard Way.
Second?
Do we have any staff comment on this or any description? Any commissioner comment? Any public comment? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries 6-0.
I move the approval of Certificate of Appropriateness, HARB 2011-26 for 310 Oak Lane.
Second.
Any commissioner comment? Staff comment? Public comment? All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Motion carries 6-0.
I move the approval of Certificate of Appropriateness for HARB 2011-27 for 228 South Wayne Avenue.
Second?
Commissioner comment? Staff? Public? All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Carries 6-0.
I move the approval of Certificate of Appropriateness for HARB 2012-01 for 200 Walnut Avenue.
Second?
Any comment from staff, commissioners, public? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0.
So the next item is a preliminary subdivision. I would imagine it's a presentation tonight, not a vote, correct?
That is correct, Commissioner.
Is the applicant here?
Yes.
This is a presentation in caucus, as I understand it, so we will not be voting on the plan tonight.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Actually, I have a question. John writes it on the agenda, it states preliminary final. Is this the preliminary or the final? It's not the final because we're not voting, so.
Right, the Planning Commission recommended that you combine them, and they recommended preliminary final. So that's how it's coming to you.
So does that
But
mean
you're
we can-
not voting on this tonight. This is,
Okay.
you used to do your caucus meetings at the end of the night, And
So this is the preliminary caucus.
right,
in essence.
this is the board's first opportunity publicly to look at this plan, to comment on it. If there's questions or things you want to add to it, an approval, this is your opportunity.
Okay, we were under the impression it was up for, but if that's the way it is, that's the way it is.
No, what the procedure is that once a planning commission makes a recommendation, then this would be the board's first opportunity to look at it. They can't vote on something they've never looked at. So as a result of tonight's meeting, then there would be a resolution prepared
Right.
for the next available meeting with the conditions of approval, and that would come back in front of this board.
Understood, thank you.
Can I just ask a clarifying question of John Rice? When we got the package, there was a set of meeting minutes attached. So what is identified here is SD number 2011-S-11 on the first page is the comments that we should be looking at. SD 2011-S12-2, which continues on that page, is not relevant to this discussion, correct?
I assume they're the planning commission meeting minutes.
Correct.
Yes, they are.
It was a little confusing to me because I got this whole package as that wasn't in any way indicating what was relevant, so I just wanted to make sure I understood it accurately.
Right, just, that would have been, I'm assuming, I don't have those meeting minutes, Kevin, but I'm assuming that was the next thing.
What we want to do is to include those so that no one said, well, there were pages missing, that they were all contained, so no one could say, well, you know, you only got a certain part. This way you got all of them, and the part, whatever is referenced here applies only to what's the
So really,
discussion
what's in
here
here,
this
Bob, I
evening.
should just be looking at those two paragraphs.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood
Sure.
correctly. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Sue sent me.
Okay. The applicant or the owner is here, Mr. Estelle, as is his attorney, Jim Greenfield. If you have any questions for them, they'd be more than happy to come up and discuss it. Mr. Estelle lives on 727 County Line Road, which is close to where the Blue Route crosses County Line Road, a couple properties to the south of the crossing of the intersection with the Blue Route. He has a parcel that's approximately 6.9 acres that he is looking to subdivide into 2 lots. The front lot would contain the existing improvements on the property, the primary dwelling, tennis court, and then the interior lot would remain as an empty lot for some period of time. At this point, there's no plans to do any construction on this property. After, as I said, the total tract area, the total site area is 6.9 acres. But after netting out the steep slopes, the leg line, the right-of-way, both properties wind up on the order of about 2.8 acres. Both properties meet the length by width ratio of the ordinance. The interior lot meets the increased lot requirement since it's an interior lot. Of 2 acres. And also, we show the increased front yard of the interior lot, which is also part of the requirement of an interior lot. It is about that simple. It's a 1-lot subdivision. We do have a waiver request for the 500-foot setback, which to us is pretty standard. And I think any questions?
You said you have a waiver request for the 500-foot setback or for the survey?
Survey. I'm sorry, I
Survey.
called it. Yeah.
Okay.
I shouldn't say setback. Offset line is what I refer to it as. 500-foot offset line of the property.
If my colleagues don't mind, can we get some comment from our staff first about Steve Norsini? Would you like to comment on that?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, matter of fact, there's a memo to the board this evening. What we would request is that the requirement for the waiver, let me rephrase that. I would request that the waiver not be granted for Section 25520B1N, stating that significant man-made features within the 500-foot of and within the site are required to be shown on the plans. We feel that's a valuable survey that needs to be done with all subdivisions. Showing those surrounding features can assist reviewers in seeing the full impact of a land development application. In the case of this plan, as you can see, really all you see is names, an address, and a tax map number. So there's not much beyond the property line, literally nothing. And the survey can be used for post-construction review of any issues that occur. The township supplied with this survey may be beneficial for other areas or other projects being addressed by the township now or in the future, and it is part of our ordinance. So in general, my request is that the waiver not be granted, be denied. So, and it can be made a condition of approval that Solicitor Rice places on that resolution that the applicant does follow that ordinance and have those survey items installed on the plan.
Steve, it's my understanding that the level of detail in that survey is not really laid out in the code. Is that right?
In the, if you go to the saldo, it's very specific, stating what is required as far as utilities. This specific paragraph that is, I'll read it verbatim, existing principal buildings and their respective uses, driveways on adjacent peripheral strips, sewer lines, storm drains, culverts, bridges, and it goes on, and other significant man-made features within 500 feet of and within the site. This includes properties across streets. So there's not the level of detail that there's elevations or contours.
Right.
They're showing these man-made features. It's not, they're not going to go through the forest and tag trees or anything along those lines. And I think it's a valuable tool for the township to have, from starting with the review and ending up in the future. Like in this plan, this is a subdivision plan, and as council stated, they're not going to build anything for a year or two or whatever. Well, when the grading permit comes in for this plan in a year or two, we would have that 500-foot survey to go back to and help us better address that grading permit and see what was going on within that neighborhood.
One of the items that we had submitted with the waiver request was an aerial photograph of the with the 500-foot line around it. I think it provides a lot of the detail that that staff is looking for in terms of the existing principal buildings. It doesn't. We don't specifically say on it what the use is, but I think we all know that it's residential. In this, I mean, looking at this aerial photograph, you can see that it's residential. I guess we would still ask for a waiver based on, it doesn't show sewer lines, but we'll have an on-site septic. So I would guess we would be asking for a waiver specifically of sewer lines, since we have on-site.
What's your logic for asking for a waiver from the requirements? Why should it be granted?
It would be quite burdensome to have to go onto every property and get the information in requested here. Specifically, let's talk about utility easements. Does that mean I have to get title reports for every property within 500 feet to be able to generate proper utility easements? Culverts. Do I have to send a survey crew out to locate culverts? Again, storm lines, sewer drains. How do I get this information? There is existing GIS information, which we may have access to. The township, I would probably have to get it off the township, so I'm not giving the township anything more than they already have.
So to paraphrase, you're just saying it's hard.
For the one.
I mean, it's not de minimis, that's for sure. So.
Jim Greenfield for the applicants. As I think you all know, this requirement of the code has not been rigidly enforced for some time, and one of the reasons is the burdensomeness of the requirement. In this particular instance, most of the developed properties within 500 feet are in Lower Merion Township. So the ability of this township to control, to sort of take this development, look at it in context of what it may be able to control elsewhere is very limited. Also, the problem, as I think Mr. Spellman indicated, is that it's difficult to go and get information on a lot of these properties. You'd have to get permission to go on properties in some instances to record this data. At the very least, you'd have to get title reports. And a lot of this information really isn't particularly useful. And 500 feet is a lot of distance to gather this type of information. And I think particularly in this instance, it's overly burdensome. If it were apparent, if it had been the township's practice, or if the township wished to change its past practice and rigidly enforce this section of the code, it would have been helpful to us to know that going in, because it would have made the whole job easier. We're now many months into this process. This application was submitted more than 2 months ago, and it would create a great hardship for the applicant here.
Steve, can you tell us what information you would not be able to get from an aerial photograph that you think would be useful?
Well, I'll just answer your question and perhaps answer council's question and the engineers. There's a certain amount of information the township would provide you, our geographic information system information, anything on that subdivision that we have, and I can't tell you offhand what we do have, which should be beneficial and helpful to you as far as implementing what's required. And then the onus would be on the applicant to perhaps get a survey crew or use county orthos to help bring those things into light. And that's why I said I know it's near the what you're hoping is the end of the process, but it can become a condition of the approval so that you still have time to get it done and things can move along. But all the items you said, and you could very easily contact Lower Merion Township and see how they could help you in providing whatever data they have. I truly believe, I'm not going to say that this is burdensome. This is our ordinance. There's a reason that's in there, and it's not just for this. It's for the future. It's for, like I say, when the grading permit comes up or any other issue on or around that street or that parcel comes up, the township has good data to look at as a baseline.
Dave Lay, you made a recommendation indicating that it should be waived. So what's your thought behind that recommendation?
Well, I mean, my opinion was when I issued my letter that information needs to be provided similar to an aerial photograph, as has been submitted on previous applications I've reviewed in the township. I was speaking to, some of the detailed information such as storm sewer, sanitary sewer, things that are specifically listed under this section that I felt were rather burdensome for someone to put on a plan, especially on a project of this limited, magnitude and scope where they're not even doing any development or construction. I understand Steve's point, and I agree with what Steve's saying, but that was my thought. There's no construction proposed here, so there was really no need to put some of those utilities on.
Very good. So my opinion is that the system as we currently have it is working satisfactory. I think the waiver is appropriate, and my thought is that when there's information that we need, we be specific on that information, and we have the applicant get us that information. But to me, this is it would be very burdensome and not very beneficial to enforce that aspect of our code. I think as it's written with the flexibility makes much more sense, and I don't think we should deviate from our current practice. That's my opinion. I understand we're not going to make that determination tonight, but that's my opinion at this point.
Steve, can I ask you, if we did not grant the waiver and the duty to put this survey together was upon this applicant, could you work with, or could staff work with them to, whittle down the burden to what is useful and what in this situation and what would be beneficial to have in our files moving forward for future development? I mean, so that a kind of lightweight subdivision like this isn't charged with having, every single thing charted to the nth degree.
Yes, Commissioner Schaefer, I'll reiterate, I think my first wish would be that we did enforce the ordinance and not grant the waiver. In lieu of that, yes, I could work with the applicant to that end.
I mean, I would say we would not be granting the waiver. They would be responsible for the survey, but that the applicant would work with staff so that the survey produced was one that was useful and not overburdensome.
I'd have to spell that out. I would respectfully request that I spell that out with the solicitor or when he does the resolution, so that it's very plain to see what would be required.
Well, my suggestion would be a partial waiver, and that it would be subject to Mr. Norsini's discretion as to, what is important to be put on a plan and what maybe doesn't. We're starting with whatever the maximum is, and I don't know what that, with what's in the ordinance, but let Steve have the discretion, grant a partial waiver, but it's subject to what goes on that plan would be up to him. What he thinks is going to be important to the township in the future and down the road within 500 feet.
Is he going to identify that information before it comes to us, or are we going to approve the recommendation with that sort of soft, broad language that?
Well, I would want that in the resolution that comes back to you. And if it's you have a meeting 2 weeks from tonight.
So he'll be very specific about what information he wants. Very good.
Right. You're not acting on this tonight, so that would come back. I'm assuming some of those things would drop out, so it would be a partial waiver subject to these items listed.
Every subdivision, using that logic, and that may be the correct way to proceed, every subdivision will have to have a partial waiver because the language of the ordinance is so loose that it could require anything. Correct? It could require first floor elevations. It could require second floor elevations.
It does not require elevations. As David Lay stated, there are certain things that are required as far as utilities, but it doesn't go to that detail. You're just supposed to show the existing principal buildings and their uses, so they're not taking first floor elevations or anything like that. They'd be showing the corners of the building, the house, the driveway, of the man-made features. So it's not to that level of detail.
And does it have to be a survey? Or, I mean, again, an aerial photo would show all that information. So you have to get a surveyor.
What we have now is this 8.5 by 11 aerial and this. And this is really not, and again, in my opinion, is not a good way to match this up. What's shown on here should somehow be married to the 24 by 36 plan as opposed to just giving us an 8.5 by 11. I mean, I know this is as Commissioner Schaefer said, somewhat of a light subdivision, but the plan itself is light too. There is not a lot of detail. Whereas the partial waiver, this should somehow be married to the full plan set so we can look at it in total as opposed to, literally from 10,000 feet to see some of the utilities that are on Worcester Road or some of the surrounding areas. That would be my request.
I like the suggestion that Elaine put forth and a process question. One of the things that's going on in this township for years that I've always been unhappy with is the way we do approvals by piece and part, so that we never get that cohesive view of what's being done. So, as Steve said, well, let's say 2 or 3 years from now they decide that it is time to build. If we're not going to have things in this to pass the subdivision, what can we do to condition in the future that we get the information we need? That would be for John. He wasn't listening.
Well, I think we all recognize this is something that's typically been waived in the past, but it's a requirement of the ordinance, and there's a standard if you want it to be waived, and the standard set forth in the SALDO and the MPC. There's got to be some kind of a hardship involved or some other better alternative. I think what Steve's point is, he wants it on the recorded plan so that that's really what we all look at 2 or 3 years from now. That's what gets recorded at Delaware County, that level of detail. So photograph 3 or 4 years from now, I think Steve would probably agree, doesn't have a whole lot of value. I don't know what the cost of it would be to do this, but we're not talking about, significant man-made features. So adjacent within the 500-foot circle, uses, buildings, other significant man-made features, which Steve, and again, I would leave it up to his discretion because he's the engineer and working with Dave, they know what's helpful 3 or 4 years from now on a plan like this. I mean,
And they'll have to approve, when we come back for conditional approval, we'll be asking staff, has the applicant met your requirements?
correct.
And if we don't, on
Well, it's gonna
25520.
It's going to have to be on the plans before they get released to be recorded. Those features are going to have to be shown
Yes.
on that. But between now and, assuming this comes back in 2 weeks, we should have a list of what, between Dave and Steve, they decide is significant enough that they think ought to be on there for future reference.
So the condition that we talk about in this partial waiver, what we're really going to say is that the requirements under 25520 have been met to the satisfaction of staff, or of Steve Norsini, PE, whatever, however we want to word that.
Correct.
Okay. So it's not really a waiver per se, but we're going to basically give staff the latitude to subjectively request certain features.
This is a situation in which even if this back lot is developed, it's a very low impact kind of thing because of its location right up against the Blue Route. So I would assume that the rigidity of the requirements would be somewhat relaxed in this particular situation. And in terms of what we might need to show on the Lower Merion side, I would hope we would be required only to show what may be on plans that might be available at the Lower Merion Township building, because I think we're talking about basically houses and driveways on that side.
And visible in a current photograph. So if there's something, if someone has constructed an outbuilding and it's not on the plans, you certainly need to investigate.
I would agree with that, but I would think that hopefully the requirement, the usual requirement of precision would be relaxed somewhat in this situation because of the circumstances.
It seems like a reasonable request, don't you think, Steve?
Work with that, Commissioner. Yeah.
Do we have any other issues or comments from commissioners on this plan? Do you have anything else you'd like to present?
No, thank you.
Mr. Ostel?
Thank you. Red Ostel, the homeowner at 727 County Line Road. I just have one question. What happens if a neighboring property owner refuses to give permission to my surveyors to go on their property to take measurements and do whatever they have to do to satisfy this ordinance?
I would imagine you would document that and submit that as your effort.
That's a hardship.
I mean,
The township's not going to require you to trespass on anybody's property as part of this obligation.
Okay.
And Steve, you should be able to have all this done by aerial or topo, correct? I mean, you can match those documents without a surveyor. You can match those images the way you want.
Well, I would request that their engineer do so as the solicitor stated. What we're looking for is to have in the future, going forward, as we have subdivisions that are approved by this board and recorded, we have a document that we can use as an asset, as a resource in looking at future items in that area or looking at future subdivisions or this in and of itself. So I'd like to have it. My request would be that it would be on or part of this plan set, not a blown up, not this ortho blown up. It would somehow be married to this plan set.
But the hardship would come from whether you have to have a surveyor do it or whether you can do it with an aerial or a topo, correct? Is that right, Mr. Spellman?
Correct.
So if they can provide that, if they can provide you with the detail with an aerial or with an aerial, then that's a significantly less burdensome requirement than if they have to send a surveyor out, correct?
Correct.
And I could work with
that's the
Mr.
level
Spellman.
of sort of compromise that I think you're going to be dealing with.
Right, because what the ortho we have now, like I said, literally from 10,000 feet, although you can see the dwellings and the driveways, that's about it. We don't know where any of the utilities are. So I think you should be able to work something out from this and some information that we can give. There may be some field work involved, but as far as utilities are concerned.
We will certainly do what the commissioners want and what the staff wants. I guess I just have one question, and that is, why has the common practice up until now been to grant the waivers to many subdivision applicants. What has changed? I mean, we're going to do what you want us to do, but I'm just,
From my point
Just
of view,
curious.
speaking only for myself,
right.
what's the financial disclosure? Past performance is no assurance of future action. I don't think we've run this township properly for the citizens of the township.
Okay.
And therefore, we're going to follow our codes. If our codes aren't right, then we need to change our codes. And I think we're willing to work with you.
Fair enough.
And I think the proposal we came up with tonight also allows flexibility for us for a larger subdivision, and we can blow it up and down.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that was a caucus discussion, so we do not have public comment. So we will move right along to the next item. Don?
Another presentation, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Okay, again, we have a presentation. This is the 2011-D-09 final CF Holloway to construct an underground parking structure at 40 Luella Court, Wayne, Pennsylvania. I believe the applicant and his team are here.
Good evening. My name is Angelo Capuzzi. I'm with the firm of Chester Valley Engineers, and we've prepared the plans that the township has under review for 40 Luella Court. I'll briefly go through the project. I know that you folks have seen it a couple other times from a standpoint of HARB, but basically 40 Luella Court is an existing building which houses 25 apartments. Mr. Holloway proposes to convert the 25 apartments into 12 condominium units. And at the same time, on a parcel of ground adjacent to the existing building, he intends to build a underground parking structure which will hold 24 cars, which is equal to 2 parking spaces for each of the proposed 12 units. The project encompasses about 1 acre in size, and the other improvements that CAS has agreed to install include sidewalks around the perimeter of the site as requested through the Planning Commission and with meetings with the neighbors. If you have a minute just to diverge a little bit, the cover sheet of our plan shows an aerial photograph of the property. It's centered in that aerial photograph, and the extent of that photograph shows everything within 500 feet of the existing building. That's drawn at a scale of 1 inch equals 80 feet. It has much more detail, I believe, than the previous plan had provided with their 8.5 by 11 photograph. I just might suggest that if you're looking to develop some type of plan or compromise, this probably shows as much information as you would need from existing buildings and driveways. It would be simple to add any sanitary manholes or storm drains based upon information that the township has. We could certainly import that information onto this photograph. As you can see, we have the outline of the proposed garage on this plan if you look closely. So as an alternate, I mean, we're talking 1 acre of development, and the area surrounding it is another 34 acres. That's how much more area there is involved with that 500-foot requirement. So, and we also have the same waiver request in but we believe we show probably more information, much clearer than was shown previously.
Mr. Capuzzi, if I could just ask you, we had spoke this afternoon.
We did.
And you had mentioned another method of obtaining that data.
Well, the other method, Steve, would be to go to a company that does aerial topography and ask them to create a plan based upon existing photographs. But that's more expensive than someone in my office sitting down and blowing up a Google map of this area. You would have to hire someone to sit down and take a photograph and develop a plan from it for this 35 acres. They would draw lines where you see buildings, they would draw lines where you see driveways, then we'd have to get that information and add to that the data that the township would give us for their sewer system. So this is a much simpler process compared to what I had mentioned to you earlier, Steve.
Well, my opinion is the same as the previous one, that I think our current system works correctly and we should stick with it. And I mean, I think this shows the sort of the burdensomeness of, or how burdensome it is to see all the man-made structures in that 500-foot radius. So we need to identify the ones that are important to us, or sort of tailor the scope of that requirement to meet a specific project.
As another point of reference, most of the townships we deal with usually have a requirement of either 200 feet or 300 feet. Radnor is one of the few that I know of that requires you to go 500 feet out.
Well, again, we have our staff or our engineer in Public Works. Our code requires more than an aerial photograph, and there's a reason behind that, and we're hearing that that reason is driving them to request that we support our code. Again, in each particular case, there may be facets of this plan that are more important to have surveyed than others, sewer lines, whatever. So again, I would say it might be useful to have a case-by-case partial waiver, if we want to call it that, and provide what information is most useful in this situation. I mean, in this particular plan, I see a survey of this type to be protection for the applicant as well, for future issues that may arise. This is a very tight neighborhood with some very intense construction coming up. There may be some issues with things that occur and things that change, and the better survey that you have of conditions currently, I think the better position, it protects everyone.
So we agree. Actually, when we got the comment we got a memo from David Lay on Friday that said this waiver is not going to be supported by township staff. So we took that as an opportunity to reach out to Mr. Norsini and to discuss it with him. I personally spoke to Mr. Norsini and said, what exactly that's not shown on this picture, which has kind of always been accepted, are you looking for? Help us give you the information you think you need to appropriately create your record. The response we got from that was, whatever in the ordinance. So there has to be, we completely agree, we're willing to work with this township and with its staff, but the ordinance as it's written does not give us the guidance we need. It sends us out with a survey crew to survey 40 acres of land or 35 acres of land. That really isn't what the township needs here. We're willing to work with you, and we think, like Angela said, this photo was getting at that. The discussion we just heard from you with the previous applicant was, look, there's a way to do this, and there's a way to do it so that everybody can get what they need, and it's not unduly burdensome. And it was start with a photo, get it scaled correctly, and then work with the engineer and show what we need to see on there. We think that's a great alternative, and we're absolutely willing to accept that partial waiver so long as the response, I guess it could always be whatever's in the ordinance is in the ordinance, but we think there's a better response than that. And we want to get there, and we want to give you what you need, and we want to do what we can do within the realm of feasible. So we completely agree. We are wholeheartedly on board with.
So it would seem to me then that just the spirit of what Commissioner Schaefer recommended, we would repeat that here, correct? And that it would be up to our engineer to identify the particulars that he wants and see if you can come to an agreement over the next 2 weeks
That would be
as to
terrific.
those particulars.
We would be completely in favor of that.
To be more specific, that you meet the requirements of Ordinance 25520B1 and to the satisfaction of the township engineer.
Absolutely.
Just so everyone knows, my sense is that this is how we've done it, that essentially we, on a case-by-case basis, we looked at that provision and we were particular about what aspect of that provision that we wanted. The flexibility of that provision, in my opinion, is important. It should be worded the way it is so it gives us the flexibility to require things and not require things. So.
Thank you.
Madam President, if I may, just to clarify, I don't think it was ever done. And that's why I think now this is something new, because what I was told is that it was always waived. So there's a difference between, well, just waiving it all together or actually providing the information. So I think where Steve's going is trying to provide the information that's necessary, and I think we're willing to work with.
All right. I mean, I
with
respect
both
that.
of
I
these firms
respect
to be
what's
able to do
happening,
that.
but I would say that it was not dismissed casually. It wasn't. It was part of a process, and a decision was made. When it was waived, the decision was made by the Planning Commission after after appropriate discussion to waive it.
And after hearing from the township engineer in those meetings. So, we will look at the ordinance as well. We need to look at that.
Okay. Do we want to do commissioners have comment or want to discuss some of the other waivers that have been requested?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Steve or Dave, I don't know if you can go to the bottom of page 4 and on to page 5 of the minutes. I understand what the bottom one is now, the waiver of 255-20B we just discussed. It says here, it refers to a motion regarding sidewalks passing 8-1. What waiver was granted there?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
Mr. Holloway has agreed to put, your ordinance requires that sidewalks and curbs be installed with all new land developments. And we've agreed to do that with one exception. In the northwest corner of the site, there's several large trees in that corner of the site. And the Shade Tree Commission specifically asked us not to install sidewalks in those areas because they were afraid that the sidewalk construction would damage the roots and eventually kill those trees. So to the extent that the Shade Tree Commission requested us not to install sidewalks, we've agreed not to put them in the northwest corner. At the request of the Planning Commission, though, we did agree that if those trees ever die, that we would put the sidewalks in.
So we'll require an escrow for the funding for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's actually it's a partial waiver of the requirements to install sidewalks.
Is it one block?
Can you just tell us the following two waivers? Just give us a description of what was requested.
All right. That was the second waiver request was the sidewalks. The first waiver request was everything within 500 feet, and the third waiver request was overflow parking. This site has 25 units, and your code requires one additional overflow parking space for every 4 units. So the zoning officer indicated that the site is currently non-compliant with that requirement. We would be required to have 7 overflow parking spaces in addition to 50 other parking spaces for the 25 units to meet code. The current plan is non-conforming in respect to all parking requirements. There's only about 19 parking spaces on the property now for the 25 units. So, but the zoning officer also said that the overflow parking is a requirement of the SALDO. So because it is, we should, even though the site is non-conforming, we should ask for the waiver of not having to put in the overflow parking spaces. The plan that we last presented to the township indicated those 3 overflow parking spaces, but it indicated them within the front yard setback, which is a violation of the zoning code apparently, because you're not supposed to have parking in the front yard setback, even though the existing parking on the property is within the front yard setback.
Excuse me, how did you go from the 7 requirement in the ordinance down to 3?
Because there's 25 units now, and you're required one overflow parking space for every 4 units. We're reducing the number of units to 12, okay, which would require 3 overflow places. So the zoning officer, in consultation with the township solicitor, thought it would be appropriate to ask for a waiver for those 3 overflow parking spaces. The zoning board, the planning commission granted or recommended that waiver be granted.
Can you give me a bit of the flavor of the discussion? The only reason I ask is the first one passed 8-1, the second one passed 8-1, and this one passed 5-4.
So there was certainly some more discussion on this waiver, and ultimately it came down to really a discussion as to whether that overflow on-street parking, off-street parking would be helpful in this situation. Some of the planning commissioners felt it would be. Some opined that it wouldn't. Generally, there was, well, there's not enough parking. The folks that thought the off-street parking would be helpful said, well, there's not enough parking there to begin with. The folks that thought it really wouldn't be helpful at all was, well, there's only 19 spaces there now, and there's 25 units. They're going to put 24 spaces in and drop to 12 units. So they're reducing density, increasing parking, and then they also recognize that there is parking lots directly adjacent. I think some of the discussion was, if you go up, you can park in the parking lot and have sufficient parking there for overflow parking. This requirement actually offers as an alternative that if you don't show the 3 spaces on your property, you can certainly get them in a neighboring parking lot. That's the language of the ordinance. It definitely was a spirited discussion, and a 5-4 vote, it certainly wasn't clear-cut either way, but based on, I guess, 5 planning commission members' interpretation, it wouldn't be helpful to this situation because, again, we're increasing parking, reducing density, and in this specific instance, there's a parking lot directly adjacent to the site that has public parking available.
I have a comment on the overall plan, if I could talk to you about that. I recognize Mr. Holloway has been to various boards, commissions, some 16 times.
Yes, sir.
According to one of the residents that I've spoken to. On the other hand, the residents believe that there will be an enormous impact on their neighborhood of the construction of this underground facility and then the appearance of the underground facility as it impacts the viewscape. I've heard some numbers about the elevation that's going to result from the construction of the underground garage, and it strikes me as being something like a military revetment from Yorktown or Fort Duquesne, that we're going to be looking at a mound of earth covered with a green roof, but that will substantially and significantly alter the view that the residents around Luella Court have of what they're seeing now. They're seeing across the court to other buildings, other houses. So could you comment on the elevation, and maybe your engineer can specifically direct me to what exactly is going to be the net result of this. I should have mentioned that the garage is going to be capped by a green roof, which will be elevated above the current plane of the court. So if you or he could comment on that, it would help me.
I'll ultimately turn it over to Angelo because he'll be able to speak more specifically to the elevation. But I think there should be some, I guess, acknowledgement of how we've gotten to where we are. And it has been kind of a process which has unfolded at all different levels of the township and through its review. Originally, we had proposed an above-ground garage. That was brought before the HARB, ultimately brought before the commissioners, and sent back and denied. And we were instructed to pursue other options, specifically an underground garage. The elevation of the property, it's not a flat piece of ground that would allow a garage simply to go in and be one flat structure. It's the way that the property is sloped doesn't allow for that. Certainly at the top of the court is one elevation. It would almost be like a home having a walkout basement in the rear of the property. The mansion sits on a hill. So in order for the garage to be placed underground, there has to be some type of leveling involved, and there has to be slopes which are leveled out to create the situation where the garage would be underground. The existing conditions, I think there's been much debate throughout the process as to what the impact is going to be. You'll see photos of folks standing out there with lines, and we'll have testimony from engineers saying, but it's this high, it's that high. And the truth is, the existing conditions out there are not simply a meadow that folks look straight across. I'm sure you're familiar with the site, but there's a hedgerow, and the hedgerow rises up above the street level, and that certainly creates an impairment of a view shed as opposed to a meadow. There's an existing garage there. There are trees there. It is not an open view shed. Mr. Holloway is proposing this underground garage, and along with that is proposing landscaping. And there's been a great debate about that landscaping plan, and that's been in front of the shade tree, and that's been tweaked as well. And I think we have a copy of that here this evening, as well as our arborist. But the impact on the view shed has to be, I think, viewed in totality of what's been presented and what's actually there. And as we've come through the process, we'd been in front of the Planning Commission several times, and ultimately in our last visit was determined that this was ultimately what they were looking for. This was the best compromise. And certainly we understand no plan is going to make everybody happy. And that's how we got here. That's how we got to this point. We started with an above-ground garage that we thought worked.
Could you just supplement what you said about the elevation, the actual footage?
Mr. Capuzzi can do that.
The Planning Commission specifically asked us to provide some cross-sections through the site so they could evaluate the question that you're asking. And the plan that I have on the table here shows those cross-sections. The low point of the site is in the southeast corner. There's an inlet here which collects all the water from the north side of Luella Court and also from the south side. At that location, which I've indicated as section BB, the height of the fill, the top of the garage roof, is just about 5 feet higher than the sidewalk will be. One of the things we're doing, in order to build the sidewalk, we have to level it off from the curb line, so that kind of exaggerates the slope going up to the garage, the top of the garage roof. But basically, the worst case location is 5 feet at that low point. If you're standing on the north side of the Luella Court looking to the south, you're looking basically over a flat piece of ground. It's basically level in that direction.
So going back to the southeast corner, are you saying that the increase after the garage is constructed and the roof is put on and the grading is completed over the current level of the street is 5 feet, or is it something?
The finished grade on the surface of the garage will be 5 foot higher than the sidewalk area.
And how high is the sidewalk area going to be above the current level of the street?
6 inches. Your curb height is 6 inches.
No significant change there.
No.
So you're talking then about a 5 foot difference. If a person is standing on the northwest corner of the court and looking to the southeast, he or she will see a view that is about 5 feet, obstructed about 5 feet in vertical height than he or she sees now.
Looking from this side of the street towards the garage, yes.
Well, I'm up here in the northwest corner.
You're up here.
Yeah, and I'm looking
across
to the southeast.
You'll be the slope of the grade of the garage and of the surface is sloped from west to east.
Right.
It slopes at 3%. So there's a 3 foot elevation difference roughly from the northwest corner down to the southeast corner. So that's a gentle slope over the length of the garage. And then you go down 5 feet at a 2 to 1 slope.
Okay. Since you've introduced the word slope, could you address the question of whether we're talking about a topography here that is steep slopes under our ordinances?
Based on our survey, there are no steep slopes greater than 20% on this property. We're not disturbing any 20% slopes or greater.
Does Mr. Lay and Mr. Norsini agree with that?
Yes, I mean, I think that's characterized correctly. Obviously, we haven't went out and done a field survey, but the applicant's engineers put together a plan, which he's put his seal on, which shows contours which do not reflect 20% or greater steep slopes, slopes of 20% or greater.
Okay. Do you have more to present? Because I have one other question, which is kind of fundamental. You recounted the experience you've had with the Planning Commission and the Historical Architectural Review Board, whereby you started out with a plan for above-ground garages. And as a result of, these are structures now, and as a result of comments and criticism and suggestions, Mr. Holloway and his company developed the plan of going underground with the garage.
That's correct.
Right, so
Correct.
far? At any time did you consider, and I don't know the view of the residents on this question, so I could be opening up a Pandora's box, but at any time did the applicant consider an above-ground plan without structures, a pervious surface with space for the 2 cars for every unit, so as to avoid what I mentioned earlier about this enormous impact of construction for many, many months, and this issue of topography and possible interference with the viewscape?
I wasn't personally involved in the early discussions with the above-ground buildings, so I'm not sure whether or not a surface parking lot was considered. It may have been, but I just wasn't involved at that point in time. I can tell you that a surface parking lot would have basically the same footprint as this garage does. It would probably have just about the same amount of grading involved. We have a 3% slope within the parking lot. Within the garage, we probably end up with a 3% slope in a surface parking lot. I don't imagine that the grading for a surface lot would be significantly different than what we have for the roof of the structure.
The grading may not be, but the end result might be better. Again, I'm not sure how the residents would view this. And secondly, the impact during construction, you wouldn't be hauling out hundreds and hundreds of cubic yards of earth. You'd be basically moving the current earth around.
Jim, I do recall, I don't mean to interject here, but I do recall that there was opposition from the residents to, in essence, putting macadam on this green space.
Yeah, but I didn't say macadam. I said a pervious surface, which I'm talking about porous rock.
Right, well, just that was an issue also.
Well, we have to understand, from the applicant standpoint, it's not a case of there can't be a development here, I believe. I mean, our ordinances give Mr. Holloway the right to have something. And if the underground facility is objectionable, I'm just kind of probing to see whether an above-ground facility would be the right thing. And while I'm on that point, Steve and maybe Mr. Lay, do we have our ordinance requires lighting for above-ground parking?
It's not very detailed on the illumination level that's needed. But if there was a parking lot, there probably would be some security lighting, but it would be minimal.
Minimal. Thank you.
Mr. Higgins, that definitely was discussed. All the options were fleshed out. And above-ground parking was one of those. And one of the main comments we got very early on when we had the above-ground garage structure was the importance of the green space and the open area. And part of that, if this were an above-ground parking lot, would not be an open area. There would be vehicles in that space. And the green space that we were told was so important at that point couldn't be feasible. And I know you responded already to Angelo's concern, but I know one of the other concerns which was brought up at almost every level was the increase in grade and height. That would be almost identical to what we have now if it were surface parking, because we would need to level it and have that flat area that would allow for the 24 spaces.
And your point on the viewscape, if it were an above-ground parking lot without structures, your point is that the view would be basically of cars.
Yes, sir.
Although we have 25 units in the building now, but I don't think we have at any given time 25 cars parked on the property.
It's non-conforming, so it's not going to count.
Well, I mean, it's non-conforming legally, but from a practical standpoint, we don't have, at any given time, I don't think we have 25 residents with their cars parked on the property.
It's very possible that the residents in that building don't have cars or have two cars. In this instance, there might be more folks that use public transportation or that prefer to walk. There's no way to know how many folks in the 12 condos will have two cars apiece. I mean, it's more along the lines with complying with the 2 spaces per unit, and that would permit, at its fullest, 24 cars.
And Jim, if I can pipe in here, I'm not sure that there is widespread displeasure about the notion of putting underground parking here. I mean, myself, I see this as a very good solution in that we're keeping the open space on top. It's it's somewhat porous if it is indeed a green roof. I'd like to see more underground parking in Wayne, so this is setting a nice precedent. I think the issues are more in how it's occurring, what's going to happen during construction, and in what it's going to look like when it's finished. But it hasn't been my impression. I've watched a lot of these meetings that the notion of having the parking moved underground is greatly, unsatisfying to most. But if we may move from this discussion, do you feel like we've...
One last thing. I looked at the record. I spent a few hours over here the last 2 weeks or 10 days. I didn't see much of anything about the interior of the building. We're talking about Henry Askin's gift to his daughter from 1885.
That's beyond the scope of
Well, but we have a HARB, Historic Architectural Review Board. Well, then there's something wrong with our ordinance. If we don't have a significant resource like this, if we don't have the ability to know how a developer is going to handle the architectural treasure that we have, then perhaps we ought to think about amending our ordinance.
Jim, that segues so beautifully into one of the points I wanted to make tonight, and that was...
Me too.
Pardon?
Me too.
We've had all of this discussion for 16 meetings and months and months and months about this garage, and smattered into that, we've had some presentations about the house and actually what that renovation is going to look like. I recall specifically seeing samples of the windows and samples of the, well, I guess it's not slate roof, but the roof that's meant to look like a slate roof, and discussions about the stucco. And for me, the historic accuracy of the way that building looks when this project is finished is of the utmost importance. And I realize that's not what is in this plan, but I would like to see in this plan some commitment that those materials are going to be, that were represented and brought to us are going to be used so that it does look historically accurate. I myself have renovated a 200-year-old home, and I'm here to tell you that when you're in the project, crazy things come up and it gets very expensive. And I want to make sure that this project, the things that go on the chopping block because expenses have gone out of control, are not those items that will make this historically accurate. The windows that are, they're not historically authentic, but they're accurate. The roof which all of these things cost more than regular renovations, the high quality stucco. And I would like to see if the applicant would be amenable to putting that in this plan, that those materials will be used, since that representation has basically already been made.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we've brought those materials both before this, the commissioners as well as the HARB. Cass is very proud of those materials and intends to use all of them. I mean, that was part of what he's doing here. So I think a note to that effect on the plan, Cass, is absolutely acceptable.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're at. We did present a Pella window which had the mutton, and I asked my attorney tonight if I should bring all those, and he said no, because we were up for approval for the garage and not that. But we did present those, not
Right,
only to
right.
Harb and also to this. We also presented the roof, which is not slate, but looks identical to slate. We submitted pictures that we had the sample that Harb asked us to do. One of the Harb commissioners asked us to take a picture of a mock-up next to the slate, and from the ground it was imperceptible. So yes, I believe that's the horizon shake, certainteed. Also the Pella window with the wide mutton that matches identically to the windows that are there. I will be happy to place
To put that in the plans, that
on the
that's a
plan.
condition.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. Now the stucco, you mentioned a high level stucco.
Well, I imagine it's going to be restuccoed.
Yes. Actually, we're going to remove, there's several layers of paint on the building that we are going to remove, repair the stucco, and then refinish it with a stucco material, not a latex or a paint. Okay, so that is all a process that will take a great deal of care to do. So there are the three elements, I think. The mansard roof, we are not changing the look of the mansard roof. We are replacing the windows with high efficiency Pella with infrared, not infrared, but yes. So I'm happy to do that.
Great. And then my point is I'd like to see that as a note in the plan so that when money gets tight in this project, which it may not, that those things don't come off the list of necessary.
No, we are committed to the elements that we showed here. I am happy to do that. I would like to address Mr. Higgins just brought up the interior. There are 25 units. 4 of the units are in the basement, so there's really only 21 units. We are not putting any units in the basement. We wouldn't try to sell units in the basement. Of the 21 units that are above ground, there's 3 floors. No 2 units match. Our units will all stack and match utilizing the original bearing points. Those 21 units that are from the first floor up have drywall partitions that have been added on each floor. The drywall partitions are all going to be removed, and we're going to retain the original walls. But we are removing all the knob and tube wiring, all the old HVAC, all the old plumbing, the lead pipes. We're taking that all out and replacing it with new modern materials. Okay, so the building will go into the next century. So I want to be clear on that, and it was our understanding that Harb's purview was only the exterior. I mean, one other thing I did mention, and I want to mention it here, we also told everyone that we would be closing off the west entrance, but we agreed to save the staircase that's on the west entrance, even though that will no longer be an entrance. And the reason that won't be an entrance is that wing does not have access to the original mansion. But when we restore the building and make 12 units, there will only be 4 units per floor, and they will extend from the center hall all the way to the west side. So there won't be an entrance on the west side. So I want to be clear. I said that numerous times at the Harb meeting, at the commissioners meeting when it came up. So I just want to be on the record that that entrance will be closed in. One other thing I'd like to say, and I think it's important about the parking, because I don't think we ever got an address from this board on the waiver question of the 3 parking spaces. I think Mr. Higgins went right to his question about whether we considered an above-ground parking lot. And at the risk of, I want to be clear, we never proposed an above-ground parking lot, even though it was asked by some of the neighbors. we first submitted an above-ground parking garage, and then we submitted the underground. Our interest in the property was always to give the 12 new residents in that building covered parking of some form. It was never our intent to provide an open-air parking lot. That's number one. So I want that clear. But that being said, some of the neighbors said, well, why don't you put a carport up? Or there were a number of things that were bandied about. We felt that the underground garage was appropriate and wanted. And one thing I will point out, there was one neighbor who was very, very concerned about headlights coming out of the garage and shining into their front door. That was the only neighbor, after we had several meetings about our underground garage, that was the only neighbor that brought that up. When we had a meeting with the neighbors, and one of the neighbors said, well, why don't you just do an above-ground garage? We asked, well, if we would even
garage or parking lot?
I'm sorry, above-ground parking lot. We, excuse me, I tried to get that in there, but what we asked them is, would you prefer to have 12 cars at night with their headlights shining in each direction? Because that's what we're really talking about. So instead of one neighbor who would have been affected by the garage door opening, the underground garage opening, which we were able, when we did the borings and we found out we had no rock and we could lower the building, we moved that entrance closer to the building to get those headlights out of that neighbor's front door. So now there won't be any lights at night shining into any of the neighbors on our periphery, as opposed to an above-ground above-ground parking lot would not only eliminate the green space that everybody is so wants so much, but also you would have had 24 cars at night shining their lights in all the neighbors from all sides.
That's a bit of an exaggeration, but I understand your point.
Okay,
Well, no,
can we move along? Does any other commissioner have any other concerns?
I just want to, I've been, I think, through all these meetings, at least with the Board of Commissioners. My only concern with this current plan, and Cass, you've worked very hard with the neighbors and with the township, and you should be commended for your patience, because this is a long process. My only personal comment is, if you're going to have this underground parking garage that extends, in essence, to the east direction from the house to accommodate 24 cars, the question is there any way to eliminate some of the parking spaces in that underground portion, so to bring the wall back away from the road, to keep that elevation difference, to make it less, and put some of the cars above ground? And the point is that some of these residents excuse me, would have guests, and those guests could park above ground. The residents would, you made a point to us at one point that the selling point of condos is that they want, kind of a place to put their vehicles in, out of the weather. So I understand the need for the either structured parking above ground or underground, but at the same time, if I were living at the eastern side of Luella Court and seeing this parking structure, coming out of the ground, so to speak, I wouldn't be too pleased if I were living there. And the only question I put out there, and it may be too late in the game, but is there any way to compromise and shorten the length? This is the distance from the house out easterly. Reduce some parking spaces underground, get them above ground somewhere on the property to reduce that impact, that visual. So that's my only comment. I don't know if there's an answer. It may be rhetorical at this point, but I got a sense from when I listened to all the meetings, I watched some of the Planning Commission meetings, that there was a big issue with this, this 5-foot jump from the sidewalk, the corner of that parking structure. Is it going to be protruding through the soil? Is it going to be visible? what is the dressing of that so it doesn't look like a concrete structure, rising out of the soil? What can we do about that? So I don't know if anyone wants to talk to that. I don't have the picture in front of me what it would look like when it's finished, but I wouldn't want a parking garage coming out of the soil in front of my house. So the question is there anything that can be done about that? Is it being addressed? What is the position?
So it was certainly an issue that came up very early on once we moved to the underground aspect, and it was how low can you get it, how close to the building can you get it, can you tighten it up, can you shorten it? And I think we've had three revisions, Kaz, at different points when we've done different testing, and we've pinched it as tight as we can, and we've pulled it back as far as we can to accommodate the 24 spaces underneath the surface. At this point, I don't think there's any other way for us to pinch it any further underground. And I don't believe the Kaz is able to consider or wants to consider at this point putting any spaces above ground. I think it's important to him for the marketing of his units that they have the 2 covered parking spaces, and that's what he's proposed. I will say, though, those comments were raised, and they were raised throughout the process, and to each comment, Kaz tweaked and pulled and tugged and ultimately got it to where it is. And
was there any consideration to have a few number of parking garages above ground to reach the number of 24? So maybe 20 underground and 4 above, or 16 underground and 8 above.
Well, you don't mean garages above ground.
Well, I don't know. When I say garages, I mean residential-looking
spaces.
Well, no, maybe garages, but the point is, I know the residents were very concerned with 24 parking garage units. Even though they were going to have style to them and look like residential, like parking, like a parking, a garage, like a home garage. There was still a big concern about having this, this mass of structure. And it's opinion.
Right.
Was there ever an exploration of saying, well, could we put a 2-story parking structure where 12 of the spaces are underground and maybe 12 individual garages are above ground? Did the neighbors ever comment on this? Did anyone ever talk about this?
Our whole plan was to provide 24 spaces, just like we did at Luella, which was a model that was very successful. And we knew that from a marketing standpoint, anybody buying these units would want their 2 cars to be convenient and to be underground. So to answer your question, the answer is no. We never considered not doing all 24 underground once we were turned down on the above ground. We were able to pull the building back 4 feet from the east. We were able to lower it. The original plan, which created a lot of discussion with the neighbors, was at that low point corner. Originally, the garage, the top of if you think of the parking surface where all the cars parked as being dead level in relationship to the basement floor that we were entering. And that was our initial plan by our architect, and he is here tonight. We didn't know what was under the ground. We didn't know if we had to blast. We didn't want to blast with all our neighbors around us because that would create issues. So until we did the borings and until we got an indication from HARB that when we received our certificate of appropriateness, we did not go and do that testing. When we did that testing and found out we didn't have to contend with rock blasting, we were able to lower the garage and do a 3% slope, as Angelo mentioned, so that we went from 9 feet down to 5 feet. We were able to lower that end 4 feet into the ground, which was huge. I mean, most of our neighbors were like, wow, the profile was lower than the existing hedge around the perimeter. So that was big. The other thing, I've heard this talk about a mound From the north side, there is no mound. It is a 2% slope from the curb, 2% up to the top of the level of the garage, which is the minimum allowed for drainage for any kind of a field or play field, soccer field. You have to have a minimum 2% slope. So all this talk about there's a mound on both sides, that is not accurate. In fact, if you take a look at where the existing parking lot ends on the site and that ground that's on the north side, we're not going to be any higher than the existing ground there. So when this is done, the only way anyone's going to know there's an underground garage on that property is with the entrance, which is right adjacent to the main structure, and the emergency walkway, which is 5 feet wide, halfway down on the south side. And the two neighbors who were most impacted by the original entrance of the garage opening welcomed that plan because we were able to move the entrance away from there.
Mr. Holloway, I'm going to ask that we move this along a little bit.
Thank you.
I'd like to get some comment from staff on their position on the waivers and any other conditions that might be. Oh, do we still have commissioner comment?
Yep.
Okay.
Two quick ones. One, there's a mention that they're going to use the parking lot for construction vehicles, the township parking lot, and that spaces, I assume, would be rented from the township. But construction vehicles seems to me take much more wear and tear of a parking lot than automobiles. So is there any plan to escrow money or something of that nature to possibly have to repave if necessary?
We could do that if the board would so require that.
Right. And then during the process, they'll have a street sweeper out there and be making sure the roads are kept clean?
That's part of the comments of staff.
Yeah, why don't we
Okay,
move to
good.
staff comments and suggestions for conditions, because I think that may add to our discussion.
And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is I agree with the waiving the 3 spots because there is that parking lot right there. So that's all.
Okay, I'm not sure who from staff is taking this.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Norsini?
Going back to just to touch on I guess it's the partial waiver request. My question is for Mr. Capuzzi. Can we use orthos versus Google Earth to obtain what we're looking for here? I mean, flyovers that are done in the winter when the trees don't have leaves, things like that. Is that possible, or it's going to have to be?
You mean a different aerial map than what we used?
Correct.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. And then that was already discussed. Discussing with staff, we'd like to see that these items are noted on the plan, and I gave Mr. Holloway's counsel a copy of this memo, so he's aware of it. Requiring traffic control when hauling spoil from the excavation of the underground parking garage or whenever construction activities would dictate to maintain access to the residential properties as well as businesses. We have to remember that there's going to be 100 truckloads of dirt going out. There's going to be dozens of loads of concrete and rebar and forms coming in. So we have a one-way road that's going to have quite a bit of traffic on it. And we're just requesting that the applicant has someone there to manage that traffic to make sure that the residents can get in and we don't, these things aren't done surgically. So there's going to be trucks stacking, waiting to get on site to make sure that the cars can get by, emergency vehicles can get by, and nobody's blocked out of their driveway. We would also require the applicant to depict construction vehicle parking and flow on the plans, as well as the quantity and location of the parking spaces required based on, along with what Commissioner Nagel brought up, in the municipal parking lot for construction activities so as not to impact residential or business traffic and access. So what we're asking the applicant at that point is to say, take a look at what you have and what you will need. The means and methods of construction nowadays involve a lot of equipment and a lot of trucks, and we don't want to see, again, even though maybe the garage will be built, there's all the other trucks that are going to be there doing their work, and we can't have the road blocked. We want to make sure that all our residents can access their driveways, and emergency vehicles can always get through. So what we're asking is that you show in the municipal lot how many spaces you need, and you can work that out with the police as to the quantity, but we want to see that, and we want to see how you're going to park your construction vehicles during the various phases. Obviously, during the excavation, that's one end, and when you're working on the building, that would be another.
Steve, can I ask Kaz or the attorney a question? How many spaces do you think you're going to take up out of the municipal lot? And where are your workers going to be parking?
As I stated to the Planning Commission, the first phase of the project will be to restore the building itself so that all of our construction vehicles will be parking on the existing parking lot. So when we're scaffolding, taking the roof, redoing the outside, redoing the inside, we believe that we can accommodate all our construction vehicles on site behind the security fence. Once the building is restored, refurbished, then we will, then and only then will we start the construction of the underground garage. And at that point, the number of construction vehicles will be minimal because most of all the heavy equipment will be on site, digging, doing the footings, doing those things. And we'll be able to still park vehicles, most of the vehicles on the periphery, because the underground garage is no bigger than the size of a regular parking lot. So there's still 35 foot of buffer all the way around that we can pull cars or trucks. We figure that we will, at that point, need maybe 8 to 12 parking spaces maximum on several days, or we'll, based on our experience at 102
So
Llewellyn.
it'll be sporadic.
Pardon me?
It'll be 8 to 12 parking spaces.
No. It'll be sporadic. Yes. Actually, we noticed today, we were on site. I have pictures of there are trucks in that parking lot today, large trucks that were parking, doing work at some of the other neighboring businesses. Trucks do park in the parking lot during the day now, in that parking lot that's adjacent to our building. So we do not see this as an issue. Actually, there's 44 spaces directly next to ours that are not permit spaces. There's 20 permit, and then there's 44 metered spaces right adjacent to our building on the west side. And today we counted at 1:45 in the afternoon, after lunch, we had lunch in Wayne, my wife and I, and there were only 21 spaces being utilized, and 3 of those were trucks. So we feel that there's plenty of parking, and we're not going to impact the neighborhood any more than businesses have their buildings restored and work going on, plumbers coming, HVAC contractors coming on a daily, weekly basis.
May I ask another?
Yes.
What is going to be the route of your construction vehicles, the ones that are going to be hauling spoil from the site? They'll come up Luella Court from Lancaster Avenue?
Yes.
And then what?
Well, then they will have to come on Luella Court and enter the site. We will be using the existing entrance, the existing parking lot that exists right now on the site. So that'll be the main entrance coming into the site.
So they'll come around the semicircle.
Yes, and go right into the site.
Pull onto the site.
Yes. And then they won't leave till the end of the day.
Well, I assume they're going to be filling up and then leaving.
Oh, you mean no, when we go to load the trucks,
yeah,
they'll be loaded they'll be sitting on the low side, and we'll be loading them on the low side. So I anticipate that the large dump trucks will be pulled in right at the south side, and will be loaded at that
right there
at that point.
And Steve, in your experience, can you estimate what the condition of Luella Court's surface will be like after the construction period is over?
That's actually another one of our comments coming up. But I'd just like to ask Mr. Holloway, I guess one of my big concerns, and in showing the parking spaces that would be required, is during the excavation phase, when the garage is excavated and you're at the point of aggregate and footings and formwork, that's when parking is going to be tight for your crews, whatever different folks are all working there, the concrete guys, and that's where we'd like to see that you have shaded out on a plan somewhere that says that this is what we think we're going to need during that time. Because it's all well and good when it's on paper, but when it starts and it's a real problem out there, I'm trying to avoid as many problems as I can working on that street, which is basically an older, narrow, one-way street that goes on a loop. So anything we can do ahead of time to address possible concerns, and we've all seen them. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so as many people in this room, and we all know what that can look like. We could talk about it, but when we put it on the plans, and our inspector could go to those people and say, this is where you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be here. Because when you excavate this and you have that overdig of 3, 4, or 5 feet, there's not going to be many trucks that can pull around there until you start your backfill operations. And that's what concerns me. But to answer the Commissioner's question, I'll go further on a few comments. The applicant is always required to repair municipal streets when damaged by construction activities. Further, we're requesting that the board require the applicant to mill and resurface Luella Court upon completion of the project in its entirety, and to include new curbing and lawn restoration as needed. So what we're asking is, we're very concerned about what's going to happen to the road when literally hundreds of 73,280-pound trucks make that loop throughout the course of construction. And we'd like to see that road resurfaced, including the portions that run out to Lancaster Pike. And again, regarding the sweeper, the applicant should have a mechanical means to keep all township streets free of dirt and dust when hauling spoil from the site or doing any other construction activities. This would also include the PennDOT-owned roads such as Lancaster Avenue, North Wayne, and South Wayne. Again, trying to address as many problems ahead of time before construction starts, so that we're all on the same page at that time.
Is the applicant amenable to these conditions that you got the memo today outlining these conditions?
Just a couple questions. Steve, in next to last condition, you mentioned new curbing. You're talking about our side of the street, right?
That would be if anything's damaged, or if trucks are going around. I know there's not a lot of curbing on that, but if anything should happen, that the applicant would take care of that.
We're required to install new curbing on our side.
On your side, that's
so if
correct.
we damage any of the...
If any residents got damaged, I think there's some flagstone curbing or some stone curbing in the area. What happens is, as the weight of the trucks go down the road, if the road deforms, even if the curbs aren't hit, they move, especially the stone curbs. So we'd just like to make sure that the applicant knows that should that be required, curbing would have to be replaced.
Okay. And as far as the mill and over resurfacing, you're talking a standard 1.5 inch.
Correct.
What do you think, Steve, of John Nagel's point of adding the parking lots into that list of concern surfaces? I don't know what they're going to be parking there, but 18 months of big trucks on a parking lot is going to show some wear and tear.
I concur, Commissioner, and I think a pre-construction video would help in that respect. Mm-hmm. We're already requesting that this be resurfaced, but I would ask that during the pre-construction video, shoot the parking lot, and then it's a very easy thing to go back to that at the end of the project and say, okay, there is damage or there isn't damage.
Okay.
Madam President, if I may, just to add a little point of reference to as well. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however it be, following up after the PICO project, the gas project within that neighborhood as well, and a lot of which I'll term as broken promises, in which the township spent an extraordinary amount of time trying to rectify problems that were understood that were going to be taken care of that weren't. So I don't want to try to tie these two together, but I think we're coming off a track record of where businesses were blocked in, they were shut down, Traffic, construction vehicles were parked in areas that they weren't supposed to be in. Traffic control that was supposed to be taken care of that wasn't taken care of, that actually we initiated getting the police department involved too as well, where we'd actually required that they hire off-duty police officers to maintain traffic because it wasn't. Knowing out in advance of the tight neighborhood that this is going to be here, and that we try to set these standards up front here, so we don't repeat that type of history that had taken place within that neighborhood in those businesses, and how undue impact that they were given, but also to a lot of the misrepresentation of pointing the fingers of fault that were wrongly pointed in certain directions.
Can I ask, Steve, this is daily street sweeping during excavation?
I think
the dirt that I see on the roads from construction, it's outrageous to me that it should ever even happen. But, you know, the neighborhood, everyone, all the businesses, all the residents, daily continuous street sweeping because the mud is sticking to the truck tires and it's being drawn all through the township. And this is not this applicant, but other processes I've seen. So.
I think that's a great idea. That's why we mentioned that, because even though there's requirements in the ordinance regarding, and the E&S controls regarding a tire scrubber and dust control, when you have this many trucks coming out, it's inevitable that could happen. And that's why we would require that a street sweeper be there. I mean, you know, whether they line it up to come through once a day. Danella had to do that at one point. They basically had to have a sweeper come through at the end of the day every day and take care of those things. Because during that initial stage, I know the applicant had stated they're going to do the remodeling, the restoration of the building first. But, you know, the nitty-gritty is during the construction phase of the garage, and that's when all that dirt and the problem could be. Once they get stabilized, things are very different, but getting to that point is going to be tight.
Thank you.
Steve, I have a question on, it says repair municipal streets. What's the definition of street? Because we've got, I just know over by me, we have that low bridge, and I can't tell you how many times trucks run into these bridges. So if somebody decides to take a detour with their big truck and crash into the bridge, is that covered by streets?
Yeah, I mean, like if you mean like on North Wayne Avenue,
Yeah.
if they came out and took a right. Yeah, they would be. And I know, I think SEPTA leases that from Amtrak, so I'm sure Amtrak would be all over them. But the applicant's going to be required to repair any damage that they do. But and aside from that, we're requesting that the board require that the streets be resurfaced. And again, I just want to make sure to reiterate, that's also the piece that comes out between the commercial buildings out onto Lancaster Pike, because they're going to take quite the beating also.
All right, do we have any other staff comment?
Can I respond to one
Sure.
request, please? So I guess our question would be on the resurfacing, the remilling. As Mr. Zinkowski said, there was some pretty major activity out in that area, and the street is not in good shape. It's in bad shape. Is there anything that was required when that work was done? Is there going to be any kind of contribution? I mean, is this going to be on us to fix what's been done? You know, what's already damaged? We certainly understand the one comment, if we break the curb, fix it, but...
No, there is a requirement, though, that for those roads, that whatever the utility work that was done, that they're required to restore that half of the road. And I believe they probably ran out of time, Steve, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they will have to be back out in the spring then?
Right. A lot of the utility work from PICO that went on the Wella Court was really spotty. So you'll see rectangles and squares. There's an older Aqua Pennsylvania utility trench before our ordinance change, which did not require the single lane milling. There is a little bit of work up in the northwest area of Luella Court where it comes out that they have to do some work, but there is nothing. There's not another stage that the applicant should be looking for of one of the utilities coming in and doing additional work. They're basically done their work in Luella Court.
So I guess the question then would be the damage they've done to Luella Court, and I think you're saying they ran out of time with the weather changing, and obviously you don't lay the street when the weather gets cold, but so we should probably work together. I'm guessing there had to be a requirement when that work was done that they repair the surface, and we just don't want to see a situation where they've come out and destroyed the road and we're repairing it.
I don't think that's the situation. But I mean, the applicant would be more than, I can provide the applicant with contacts from the utilities, but I don't think it's our place to bring that together. They've done their work, the bulk of their restoration that needs to be done, and
I think that's more the question. The restoration that needs to be done, I think Mr. Zinkowski is saying, has not been done because of the weather change. So that's coming, that's forthcoming. Is that right?
I think there's probably somewhat of a little bit of confusion as far as where. Out on North Wayne Avenue, Station, and part of those roads, there is final restoration that needs to be completed. The few patches that Pico had on Luella Court are done, and they have wearing course. There's just a little bit up, like I say, in the northwest corner as you come off Luella Court heading towards Station. That is going to have some resurfacing work done, but that shouldn't affect the area we're talking about for you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the public comment, unless any staff member has anything else to say. This is a caucus. We will not be voting tonight. Ordinarily, we do not have public comment when we have a caucus. Given the nature of these proceedings and the amount of time and energy that has gone into this, we will have public comment tonight. But it's 9 o'clock, so let's try to be efficient and concise. Okay. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment?
Good evening. My name is Allison Engel, and I live at 23 Luella Court with my husband and 3 children. That is the southeastern corner of Luella Court, so I have some concerns, and I appreciate you bringing up the elevation tonight because that's been very confusing throughout these proceedings. So from where my house is, I guess I'm looking at about 5.5 feet from where the road is between the curb and the elevation. And I feel what I'm not getting at this point is some type of idea of what we've talked about the view shed, but there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the trees at final maturation. And I feel at this point that we should have seen some type of 3D rendering or something of that nature so that we can get an idea at the end of this project, what am I really looking at? I'm looking at a new elevation. My 3-year-old's going to be looking at a retaining wall at this point, so that's not great. The new elevation brought up to 5.5 feet from our street level. And then what I'm seeing, if I'm thinking about the landscaping project and how that will look at the end, I'm imagining in my mind, the size of trees and shrubs on top of that 5-foot ground. So I feel that we're losing our whole view shed. And we talk about keeping this open green space and how it was not appropriate to put an above-ground garage. The harbor was so adamant about maintaining that character in the neighborhood, to maintain that view shed, and that's one of the reasons why this above-ground garage was not appropriate. And I feel that this is just another way of destroying the view shed. I don't understand what I'm going to see from the street. I'm imagining just the higher wall of dirt and the trees and the shrubs when they're fully grown. And I feel that at this point, landscaping design firms and engineering firms have 3D capabilities in showing us these renderings, and I'm just not seeing it. And I'm hoping that that could be addressed. Thank you.
My name is Judy Strimmel, and I live at 47 Luella Court. We have all been through many, many meetings at this point. I do have to take the opportunity to say how disappointed I am in the process, in that Harb sort of didn't follow through in the way that I wish they had been able to do. Certainly Shade Tree did not. And certainly the Planning Commission did not. It seems as though once you use that holy grail word green, everything goes away and it makes it all right. It's not all right. There are 2 issues in this town that most people speak about. One is the parking and one is the stormwater issues. Both of which we are saying, oh, we'll give you a variance. You don't have to provide the additional 3 parking spaces. Oh, we're going to let you take over the township parking that people that go to shops, people that live in the area, all utilize. You can put your 30 trucks there, and that's okay. Whether it's 10 trucks, 20 trucks, 30 trucks, it's okay. You don't have to put the 3 off-street parking spaces on the property, and you can build this 5-foot, I don't care what you want to call it, but it is not underground. It is an above-ground mound couched in the holy grail of green. I think those are all issues. We're going to cut down trees. What is more green than keeping trees? Condo trees are not stormwater maintenance the way we want to see it in this township. All of these things could have been addressed all the way through all of the boards that we went to. I think Mr. Holloway was willing to do it. We certainly as neighbors were willing to do it, but everyone said, oh no, you don't have to do any of these things. What is the point of having these bylaws or these, can't think of the term, but what the township says that you need to have in this town if nobody's enforcing it? It's like, no, you don't have to do any of these things. Whatever you want to do is okay. I understand the financial issues. I understand that we're looking at a lot of properties in this township that are owned by the township that need addressing, and I know the last thing that this township wants is to own this building. I understand all of that. I understand about buying and selling real estate. I understand property rights. But it's too much on too little, and we have not addressed what we actually have the bylaws to do. And poor Mr. Zinkowski, I am going to have him on my speed dial every time I see one thing that is not in order. And he knows I can be a pain. I'm just so disappointed, and I guess I'm looking to you as our court of last resort. What are you going to do for this neighborhood who, just as I moved into it, there were people that worked vigorously, I mean vigorously and tirelessly, to make this an historic district? Where does that come into all of this? I don't see where any of that was taken into consideration. I don't see where the neighborhood and the culture of the neighborhood was taken into consideration. I am not blaming Mr. Holloway. I truly am not. He's just trying to make a buck, like we all are. But I truly am blaming the township. With that, I have nothing more.
Hello, Jim Schneller. I am not an immediate neighbor. I actually just moved 500 feet closer. I'm strongly attached, and in fact, to the area, and I travel the court often. And I wanted to just put in 2 objections. I'm really concerned about the Planning Commission, and I think the board, the last time this came before you, deeming this as pervious soil. If it's poured concrete with 18 inches or 24 inches of soil, I don't know how you can call that impervious. And I wish you'd confer with some experts and see what the typical consensus would be in any township in the state. I don't know if it's ever come up before, but I think that should be part of your consideration. Second of all, likewise, I think for the properties on the south side, you should just get in an appraiser and ask a real estate appraiser, are these property values being severely lowered or compromised by the bunker, and settle the question with dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Hi, I'm Susan Byrne from Luella Court. I have a presentation, but I'm going to skip it because it doesn't seem to do any good. I'm going to remind the audience, because I know you all are aware of the executive summary for the comprehensive plan, which gives you your main focus to keep Radnor as it is. We aren't like everybody else. We don't want to be like everybody else. And that was, we discussed that in a meeting earlier this week, or last week actually, and Cheryl Tamola was there, and she's been involved in writing the plan several times. The two major foci of the report on the executive summary are to take care of the Wayne Overlay Business District and to preserve neighborhoods. And I'll reiterate what Judy Strimmel said and actually make it a little stronger. I'm disgusted with what I've seen. Disgusted. Every board has passed it along like a political hot potato. No one has really focused on what they are supposed to be doing within the power that they are given as boards. They just keep passing it along because they really don't want to touch this because it is such a lightning bolt project. So let's talk about the 16 meetings. Dave Falcone said in one of the meetings early on that they chose the route that they took, which is they're able to take it and they took it. So the 16 meetings that we've been to, we see no benefit to. In fact, we now find ourselves potentially facing a pretty violent project to the neighborhood. But we didn't choose this route, and we're not going to make a dime on it. It's just taken my time and taken a lot of people's times. So, Jim, you addressed the height of the garage. We looked at the plans the other day, the current set of plans. At some point in the middle of this, when we were not looking right, when we were supposed to be looking left, and we realized what was going on, we realized that the contour lines and the height elevations changed in the southeast corner from reflecting the top of the roof to reflecting the floor of the garage. It's currently 88.5. The inlet is 91 and change. If you take 88.5 and you add a reasonable building height to it, you come up with something that's much higher than 5 feet. So I implore you all to take a look at those plans and see what the height of the building really will be, because by our calculations, it's between 7 feet and 9 feet high.
Susan, I did, we had that conversation last
Yes.
week, and Helen Gallagher, you and I, and I've been struggling with this problem that you presented. I spent some time with Steve today, Mr. Norsini, and I specifically asked him to show me with yellow marker and black pen what the elevations are going to be before, what they are today, and what they will be when this project is finished. And what I found is that currently on the southeast corner, the feet above sea level is 93.28 feet, and the proposed is 98 feet. So that's a little under 5 feet difference. That's an increase. I think we have to understand that. And on the northwest corner, it's a negligible increase. It's 101. Today, it's 101.5.
Agreed.
When it's finished, it's going to be 102.6.
Yeah, that's not a big deal. It's the other side. I'll go back and look at the plans again, but it's we know, and we've talked to Cass about this directly, and I tried to get him to give me a straight answer, and I kept getting, a roundabout way of answering the question. I never got a clearer answer on it, but I don't ever see how it could be 5 feet high. It just doesn't make sense to me. But I'll go back and take another look.
Well, I think Mrs. Engel
has
has the real concern, and you do too, but I mean, she's going to be facing the entrance for the trucks, and she's going to be looking at a much, from her standpoint, a higher elevation.
I have to get into my house, so if the view shed is interrupted or encumbered, it's going to be a problem for me because I have to go all the way around. I'm not dealing with this. We're not dealing with this as individuals. We're dealing with it as a neighborhood. So we all have problems with it. I have major problems about what is going to happen to Allison's family. I do. So let's take a look at, well, in my experience with these projects over the last almost 10 years, when problems start to overlie problems, it should be an indication to everyone that the plan has problems. So let's take a look at the Bank of America building. We talked to them about, Alex Wolfington, about that project for a long, long time. He was very forthcoming with information, but we just kept saying to people, it's going to stick out. It's not going to be a marketable product. It's not going to make sense. And look at it today. It is exactly as bad as we thought it was going to be. And for him as well. I mean, we don't want to see anybody have problems like that. I'm one of the few people who has read the whole comprehensive plan and has read most of the stormwater management report, and I have the advantage of having lived on Pennsylvania Avenue and just had a house there for 16 years, which I sold in 2006. In the stormwater management report that we just spent a lot of money on, Pennsylvania Avenue and anything below it has major problems because we're the highest ground, and so does Midland Avenue. So anybody who's not paying attention to this from those two areas loses their right to complain when this project gets underway. Everything runs down from the mansion because that's what the Askin picked, because it's the best ground. It's the nicest location. But if we look at you're reducing the necessity to put the visitor parking spaces on there, which by code are supposed to be dedicated only for the mansion's visitors parking. And you can take that, and those of you that were involved with the Pembroke Avenue project know that Pembroke Avenue had problems with visitor parking, which is why they just needed to expand that. They say that's why they weren't selling. Add to that, in Pembroke North is a great example also of impervious, the way impervious is counted for green roofs. In Pembroke North, the area that is above the garage that is green was not considered to be pervious. Somehow this project is different. I don't know how that could be. So if you add those two things together, and then on top of that, consider that the calculation for impervious numbers in Cass's own plan was 23.21% in July, 27.8 and change in August, 34 and change in October, 37.9 in November, and he has a maximum of 40%. So by taking out what we have measured as steep slopes, and Barron's going to talk about this later on, but contour line to contour line, the slope might not be steep, but if you do it incrementally between the contour lines, does this make sense? It can be a steep slope, which has to be taken out of the net lot area, which means that 37.9 is now really much closer to the 40% maximum. And if you take the visitor parking spaces, although there are only 3 of those, add these all in together, and you've got a very shaky looking impervious number. So I ask you to take a look at that as well in the next 2 weeks. It was kind of staggering to listen to the description that Steve Norsini was talking about with this project, although I've known it all along. It's too much in too small a space. There are lots of development opportunities that would be much more suitable. This is too much in too small a space. Unlike 102 Luella, you can't close one lane in a one-way street to get your development through. Once it starts, and he really has some skin in the game, how's he going to get around a little street like that with those big trucks and all that dirt? Just doesn't make sense to me. So I ask you to consider these issues, take a very close look at the plan. I have found that some of the descriptions that we have heard in the past just really don't make sense, and I hope you take the time to take a look at those as well and see what you think. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Hi, Baron
Hello,
Gemmer,
Baron.
South Wayne Avenue. I'll be as brief as I can, and forgive me for some of you who watched the prior meetings. I'll go over the points very quickly that I have and minimize them. First, I want to address what's been talked about before, too, about the 3 additional parking spots. First, there's some mischaracterizations about, apparently from the zoning officer and from the applicant. There's no existing nonconformity. And let me tell you why for a couple of 2 reasons. One is it's a SALDO requirement, so there's no existing nonconformity. It has to be something zoning related to be a nonconformity. Secondly, the only thing that triggers it in the SALDO is when the parking is provided in private garages or driveways, which is not the current case. So even if the SALDO did apply, there'd be no additional parking required, not the 7 that was alluded to because there are 25 spaces, or even 4 in the case of 12 apartments. If it's public common parking, none of those overflow spaces are required because people come and go. Visitors have no place to go when you have a private garage or driveway. That's why you need the overflow spaces. So the fact, referring to it as existing nonconformity is wrong on a couple points. Susan brought up about Pembroke North, and what happened there, where they do have an underground garage, very similar situation. That requirement was just plain missed. The township engineer missed it. I talked to him about it afterwards. It's not the current township engineer. And that is why they had to annex that R5 lot on Lancaster, as they were saying that they weren't selling, in spite of the fact, at the time, the Acme parking lot, which is very close with that sidewalk, was not very well used, and there was plenty of parking there, yet they still wanted their on-site. And I have a feeling the same thing's going to happen here in terms of visitors are not, they'll want visitors to be able to park closer, let alone the fact that we had the issue with the electric charge station before, taking up a parking spot. So to kind of turn down 3 spots that will be used by visitors in the already parking challenged North Wayne Avenue area, I think is a mistake. I think those spaces should be required. There's a reason for them. It's different than the situation here. Even if it's 25 units down to 12, you're taking away all common parking, all visitor parking in that respect. Hopefully this should be my only visual for tonight. Let's see if it's. Oh, actually, well, thank you, David. Yeah, there we go. Let me get the pointer here. This is, again, for those of you who saw the Planning Commission meeting, here's the door. This is the automobile vehicle entrance here. Here's the pedestrian door there. And I won't go through the whole litany, but the fact that a parking garage is considered an accessory structure, and accessory structures in R4 connected to the building are considered part of the principal building. So what these, you can't see it probably on the screen here, but they're in red here, those 2 walls there. They are part of the principal building. And if you can see the little dotted line here, that's the front yard setback. So they are actually in the front yard setback, which is not allowed in any of the districts. And some of the comments have been made by staff that those are retaining walls, when in fact they are not retaining walls. They have the outside air there of the walkway, and they have the inside air of the garage on the other side. They basically are walls of the building, and they have, just like this wall has the roof going that way, this wall has the roof going that way.
Baron, can you help me with one thing?
Sure, Jim.
Did the applicant go to the zoning hearing board of the township for relief from the requirement that this garage meet the front yard setback?
No, and I'll certainly defer. Let me take a shot at it, Dave, and he can step in. No, there was, and as a quick aside, this portion here was not part of the original plan for what I'm going to speak about. When a plan was submitted to Matt.
No, my question is, did they go to the zoning hearing board?
Short answer, no.
To get a variance or to get approval for not having to comply with the front yard setback for the garage?
Short answer is no, because there was an opinion rendered by the zoning officer that because the garage was underground, it did not have to comply with the front yard setback.
Well, but I think that, based on my reading of the file last week, that opinion by the zoning officer was upheld by the zoning hearing board.
Actually, it wasn't even appealed. That there was a different issue that went before zoning.
Well, let me just, can I add something? It's in the zoning, it's referenced in the zoning hearing board decision. And I don't know whether Commissioner Higgins was referring to that, but this is the 2861 zoning hearing board in that application referenced the June 3rd letter, which I think was Matt Bauman's zoning interpretation that the setback didn't have to be met because this whole structure was underground. I mean, that wasn't in front of them specifically, you're right,
Yeah.
but
They referenced it. Matter of fact, they actually, in some cases, went out of the way to say that we're not reaffirming that. It's been presented as part of the evidence,
But they concluded as a matter of law that the setback requirement was not applicable to the garage.
No, that was not what they were there at the zoning hearing board for. They were there at the zoning hearing board to see if it was an expansion of a non-conforming use requiring a special exception, and they ruled that it was not, so that nothing...
Well, if I'm wrong then maybe you have an argument. Go ahead with your argument, but I'll have to go back and read the file. I think I'm correct, but go ahead.
Yeah.
And I think it might be in the Delaware County Planning Commission, because I recall reading something.
No, it's a zoning hearing board.
Yeah, it's in the second paragraph of the zoning hearing board decision, what Commissioner Higgins is referring to.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, I've read, in reading my decision, Max, that they mention that. They explicitly kind of distance themselves from it from other purposes, but that was not the matter before them in reaffirming that. The point being, with going back to that June 3rd letter, the June 3rd letter said you don't have to comply with the front yard setbacks because everything's underground. Well, this portion was not part of the plan at that time, and here we have two walls now that A, are not underground, and B, weren't covered under that ruling or that opinion by the zoning officer because it wasn't.
So are you saying they should go to the zoning hearing board to get a variance for those walls?
That would be an option. I'm saying yes. All I'm doing right now is presenting to saying here's a problem with the code, whether it's SALDO or zoning. In this case, it would be zoning. Yeah, I'm not saying a course of action. Susan already went over how the impervious cover increased, whether that was difference in calculations or different in the plan from July to November, and we're very close here. And I know John doesn't necessarily agree with me on this, but if you look at the calculation of lot area for SALDO, it basically says you take your lot lines and you calculate your area, then you start subtracting things off, like wetlands and right-of-ways, et cetera, and also steep slopes. Now, the lot area calculation is ubiquitous. It doesn't say it's only for the existing conditions, it's only for the proposed conditions. It's actually used for both, and I think, matter of fact, there were some comments to that effect in the latest engineer comments. And what you have to realize is there may be some issues with steep slopes existing now, and I'm not going to get into those. I'm just going to talk about the steep slopes that are actually being created as a result of this. And if they're in this neighborhood here. Obviously, when you're going 5 feet down, there's steep slopes all throughout here that are being created because of how tall the garage is compared to the existing grade that's surrounding that part of the circle. And this says that you need to be subtracting off 75% of those. And some of the assertions have been, well, that only applies to the existing, not to the proposed. And I'd like to make a couple comments on that. First off, the code makes no differentiation for that. And matter of fact, probably a vast majority of the time when you're doing this lot area calculation, you're doing proposed, because subdivision, you'd have to tend to have many lots. Sometimes you're going to have a single lot when you're just doing a commercial development. But let me take you to a conclusion that becomes nonsensical even more if you take that stance. If I have a commercial property, and let's say it's somewhat similar to this, where I'm building an underground parking structure and building a commercial building, and I'm very close to the impervious surface coverage, but I'm creating steep slopes because of my underground garage or whatever the case might be. But those, according to the logic, those aren't counted because I'm creating those. Those are part of proposed, not part of existing. If I sell the property or come back in 5 years and want to rebuild my building, just changing it slightly, maybe even reducing the footprint slightly, you'd tell me I'd be non-conforming because now those slopes would be existing. And both my existing and my proposed and my plans 5 years from now would be non-conforming. So my argument is the lot area is the ubiquitous calculation. You need to take each of the different scenarios as is. So the right-of-way, what it is now, and the right-of-way after, the lot lines, what they are now and what they are proposed, and and steep slopes that they exist and steep slopes that are being created. The language makes no differentiation for steep slopes that are being created versus already exist, unlike zoning does, where it talks about what can be disturbed. There it makes the distinction between ones created as a result of the grading code. So the bottom line of that is with as close as the impervious calculations are, and they are including too much lot area because they're not subtracting out the steep slopes that are being created as a result of the garage. And my last point, Susan touched upon it briefly, and actually I believe Mr. Sneller did too. Those numbers that you hear, the 37, the 38%, those are not including, obviously, any of the garage itself. Those are a result of the mansion and the sidewalks and the drive leading up to it, et cetera. So the garage itself is being considered pervious in spite of the fact it's actually 8 inches of soil and then 4 inches of other materials that take the water away, and then the concrete of the garage above that. And as Susan said, in Pembroke North, they have a below-ground garage, and parts of it where they were landscaped and elevated, that was still considered impervious in those calculations. And if you look at what the township has done in other situations, like swimming pools, which you can make an argument, well, the water in there absorbs the rainwater. But you still have the concrete that's 5 feet, 8 feet below there that doesn't absorb it. And that's the whole point. It's different than stormwater. Stormwater, yes, you can figure out how to manage it, but pervious is where does it go regardless of what's above it. The code, when it talks about impervious structure, impervious surface, basically gives 3 parts to the definition. One is surfaces that don't absorb rainwater. Second, it says all buildings, parking structures, etc., which this would fall under. And then the third option is anything else that the township engineer may determine. And it doesn't give the township engineer the right to take things out of the other 2 categories, but they can add things as necessary. So in this case, the code does not differentiate whether a parking structure is cantilevered three stories in the air, where there's where there's space between it and then ground that can percolate below it, or if it's in the ground, no more than when we have balconies, that those are considered to be impervious. Because you take a look at that footprint, it's part of the building. It doesn't matter where it's located, it's considered impervious. So both the definition and the process and the precedents we've used before jive and would say that this is, yes, it may be the stormwater may be handled fine here, but it's not a pervious surface. It'd be no different than me now going out to my either flat roof or gabled roof and putting astroturf on it and allowing myself to build a bigger addition now, because now that surface absorbs water and it's being handled, through the roof system, through the gutters, no different than this is being handled. I mean, to me, if you go, no pun intended, but this is a very slippery slope. If this is a pervious structure, then there's a lot of ways you can get around pervious structures. It doesn't have to be a foot underground. If surfaces that absorb rainwater is the criteria, then that's a pretty easy loophole to get through. And the consequences could be pretty severe stormwater-wise, because you have to remember, typically a residential renovation or something doesn't go through saldo, and unless they're moving a lot of things, they don't go through. They aren't required to go through some of the stormwater management either. So a lot of things could be done to circumvent impervious covers things that would have a devastating impact upon our already taxed stormwater system if this kind of thing were to be allowed.
Well, Barron, I just want to comment on that one thing that you brought up at the end. I mean, when I watched the last Planning Commission meeting, that was the most interesting discussion to me, because it is particularly vexing that our ordinances are not clear as to whether a green roof would be, I'm assuming this is an authentic green roof, that it doesn't speak to that. But I can't imagine a world as a community we're trying to encourage this type of absorption of water at its source and encourage this type of building. I can't imagine a world where we wouldn't envision that as some sort of pervious coverage. Maybe not 100%. I know other municipalities that have taken the time and amended their codes to speak to this issue have some sort of formula, 70 to 90% of it is. We have not had that community discussion yet, so it is perplexing to do this. But as the code stands now, before we've done that community soul searching, it is up to the engineer, and the engineer has made that finding. I think that this is impervious, that this is pervious.
Well, just to respond very quickly, my point is he has the right to add things. He can't take things out of those other definitions, so it's not within his wherewithal to make the determination that you were referring to. Back to your point about one of the reasons that most people wouldn't consider this pervious is because it's not taking care of the water at the source. All it is letting it go down 12 inches and then rerouting it somewhere else. It's not a true green roof where it sits there and through evaporation and normal plant perspiration it's just going down and then being funneled, just like a roof, literally just like a roof does. So it's not really a green roof in that sense. All it is rerouting the water. And if you do look at the townships that have ordinances that allows green roof, and ours, it doesn't say it doesn't allow green roof. It just doesn't give it any consideration to call it pervious. That's my point. If you want to rewrite it, that's fine. But the way it is now, it wouldn't allow it. But the townships that do allow that, they have explicit requirements. Not only do they explicitly mention it, but they have explicit requirements, usually 2 to 3 feet of soil before they will consider it a green roof and give it special consideration in terms of pervious, etc. So ours is not only silent on it, and then the current application has only 8 inches of soil plus 4 inches of other structured materials. So.
May I ask a question about it?
Sure.
What would happen if the determination was made that the structure was an impervious surface? What would happen to the plan?
Oh, well, it would be considerably over the impervious cover percentage.
But prior to the garage, there was an impervious lot proposed for it with a structure that would have an impervious roof. So,
and that would have been, you're talking about the original plans, perhaps before Harb. Those would have been way over too, when including the driveways. Yes.
So it would have had under the original plan that didn't have the unit with what we're calling a green roof, or some are calling a green roof, would have required to go to zoning for relief due to impervious cover.
Oh yeah, it might be, because we did those calculations at the time. That was part of the issue in terms of how they were doing the driveways. And it also gets back to a point that Jim brought up too, and I don't want to speak for the neighbors, but the neighbors were not necessarily against a surface parking lot, because that would have been it was when they started covering it and ruining the view shed. But you have to remember too, there's already 18 spaces on there, and I can't remember with the garage there. You'd only be talking about adding 6 more. It wouldn't be taking up that much more of the area. There'd still be plenty of green space there. You might have to configure it slightly differently, but really all we're talking about is 24. And going back to one of my other points, when you have a surface parking lot like that, you don't have that requirement for the 3 additional spaces anymore, because now you've got a common parking area. And I understand Mr. Holloway's reasoning in terms of how he wants to sell it and why he wants the covered ones. But in terms of what it means in terms of the zoning and things, if you had 24 surface parking, the additional 3 goes away, and rightfully so, because now they're shared and guests come and go with the residents, and it kind of meters itself out as need be. Okay. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment?
Cindy Munger, 31 Luella Court, and I really hate being last. So I will try to be really brief. First of all, Jim, to address the question you had in terms of the zoning as to whether or not that was a point of law and that they made a decision, I was under the impression, Mr. Falcone, that you had made it very clear in an earlier meeting that there really isn't a lot of law in terms of whether about underground garages, and that the zoning meeting was not really a legal determination, but it was more a persuasive one relative to the process of the determination letter and whether or not it can be upheld, which it was. So it was really the contents of the letter that they decided upon, not necessarily that the decision was in fact correct, but that the process was correct. And I think that brings us into some of our issues. But first of all, I want to say that I'm the one that's, I'm constantly harping about the same thing, the concern about errors, omissions, and now I'm going to say contradictions and added to that. And that was really the basis of discussion at the Planning Commission. And I commend you on being concerned with the big picture. I think that's important. And I think that's the reason we've had a lot of these issues. But of special importance is, I think we have to look at point number 1, the fact that I think we have some very blatant contradictions with the Historic District Ordinance. And somewhere along the line, we completely lost the Historic District assignment. In fact, we lost it so much that I've just gone over the Delaware County Planning Commission document that was recently submitted, and not once in that entire document, anywhere in that one, in the document that was the Chester Valley Engineers, does anybody refer to Luella Court as an historic district. And yet, in the first historic district meeting, the HARB meeting, one of the members described the purpose and intent of looking at the ordinance as sort of like zoning for the historic district. That was the definition provided by a member. And we lost that completely. And so you go before these planning commissions, Delaware Planning Commission, and you don't find any reference whatsoever that this is, in fact, an historic district. At the Planning Commission meeting, people there were shuffling through papers because nobody had ever read the ordinance. And they said, what does it say? What's it mean? Is this a problem? So nobody read the ordinance. And then legal reference was made that said, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have anything to do with the district. But it does, and there are contradictions. First of all, the decisions that originally were made with HARB, upheld by you, was the fact that the defining characteristics of that neighborhood had to be preserved. That was the intent. That is the reason behind it. And that's not going to happen because, let's face it, we've got a 5-foot wall at a minimum. And we have a lot of stuff that's going to be piled on top of it. And I have a question to you. If you had a toddler and you were buying a place there and your little toddler could go tumbling over a 5-foot wall, roll right into a one-way street around a curve at the south end, would you buy that place? I don't think so. I think you're going to want a fence around it. So now you've got a 5-foot wall that, frankly, as a mother, I'd be pretty hard-pressed to say don't do it. I'd rather have your toddler fall over it. And I had discussions with Cass about it at one of the meetings. And that's when I was told it wasn't 5 feet. It's real low now because we're going down. So suddenly it's gone back up. So let's think about that. Errors, omissions, and contradictions. Now, we lost the historic district issue. Okay, fine. And if you look at the reports, we've also lost the whole shade tree issue. Anybody here?
Excuse me, we haven't made a decision on this. And
okay, then I apologize.
I know my fellow commissioners are very mindful that Luella Court is a historic district and very mindful of the ordinance. And when we make a decision, we have to keep in mind the fact that the ordinance requires us to make certain findings. I personally intend to do that.
Well, thank you, and I'm very glad to hear that, and I think other members here as well. But one of the things we want to make sure is that it is on the table and it is on the record as well, because, and this is not you guys have been very balanced, but things seem to fall through the cracks, and that's the only reason. Let me move on. I think we've done that one. How about the shade tree? Every document that's been submitted says there's going to be 18 tree replacements. We found discrepancies all over the place. Are there still going to be 18 trees? And here's the other thing that just bothered me tonight. Tonight I hear very cavalierly, if the trees die, we'll put a sidewalk in. Well, they're not supposed to die. And if nobody cares if they die, then do we really care that the new plan may not have the room for the root structures to take hold, to grow to the 50 feet that they're going to after we're all dead and buried? I don't know who's checking on that. Errors, omissions, and contradictions. I still don't have my question answered that the transplanted tree that we don't have to find some to replace is going to be moved somewhere. Nobody's answering. So please look at that as well. And in the engineer report, I found it, and I'm going to tell you, from my profession, we used to call it slippery language. It's referred to as vegetation. Since when is a 100-foot, 100-year-old tree vegetation? They're historic trees. And understand something else. You talk about the characteristics. Those trees were put there because they were the air conditioning of that time. They are integral to the characteristic of that district, and we're throwing them out. Now let's take a look at the sight line, and I want to bring up a bone of contention that's really ticked me off. Everybody refers to the sight line. Everybody refers to that hedge. That if you stand in there and you look, it's the sight line. Well, that is erroneous. That is false. Because if you look at these pictures, and I'll leave it to you to look, and I have pictures covering last couple of years, the hedge in question was allowed to grow the past year higher. And it wasn't that high before, and the reason it wasn't, that the people that lived in the house that I own now, they had a child hit by a car as they came around, and it's been very carefully monitored to make sure those hedges are very low. but they're not low now. You figure it out, okay? Now, the last part, the green roof. Anybody here have the expertise to know whether or not that green roof is going to work, or has, really, really researched this? I come from Chicago, and the company that was brought in is excellent, excellent. And they put in about 5 million square feet of green roof. However, there is no reference that I can find that's comparable to the reference we're talking about, that we are replacing ground with green roof. Remember that the standards of improvement of green roof generally is on top of a building. So of course it's an improvement, huge. But we're replacing the ground. We're replacing a space that is supposed to be historically preserved. So let's be sure it works. Plus, if you look at this proposal very carefully, you cross-reference it with a video, I would advise you to look at the video under YouTube, and under each point, see if it's covered, and then go back to the points that were skimmed over and cross-reference that to potential problems with green roofs that may apply to our scenario. I think you'll have some interesting information. But it'll take you a while. I sat and watched videos Sunday for 7.5 hours. And you got to really, really watch them. In addition to which, this proposal is what's called a shallow intensive green roof. Now, you cross-reference intensive green roofs are the ones you want to put in this place because it gives you more ground, it gives you better opportunity to grow vegetation. Its water retention program, I believe, is similar because it's all that egg crate technology. But an intensive is supposed to enable you to grow better foliage, grow trees, things of that nature. This was described as shallow intensive. Now, I've done enough proposals in my lifetime to know that that's slippery. What does that mean? And if you look at the vegetation that in the references that were provided, and then you cross-reference that to the amount of soil on that vegetation, you're going to find that there's more depth than what's proposed. So don't be misled that you're going to have a big bush on this thing, when in fact you may not. In addition, I would look very closely at the amount of maintenance that is required. And is there an expert we can ask that's not part of the township or concerned with their future career or whatever other reason that we seem to get all this language put in that doesn't really reflect the issues? And then we have, and this is just me, and I'm going to say it right off the cuff, I'm probably out of character, but I don't think the numbers work for this project based on any development issues. They just don't seem to work. And it worries me in terms of the expense because it's going to be at the expense of the mansion. An underground garage and a green roof are incredibly expensive, significantly more expensive than throwing garages on top. And if the numbers don't work, if you don't get the 3x times the purchase price less the development, plus 20% based on the fact that when you're doing historic restoration, you have to take a different development ratio. If your condos don't sell or they come close to that, then you may have a problem. And then let's look at the other issue. Pennsylvania is a property rights state, big time. As long as we have a scenario right now, you guys can you can make decisions to stop this sale, and they can't scream foul. But understand something, once that purchase goes through, a different level of rights occur, and Mr. Falcone has been extremely strategic in reiterating that he is doing everything you told him to do. Dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's. What are you going to do if you find out you were wrong and we didn't do this the right way? I was talking about this to a friend of mine, and my friend said, you know what this is? This is Radnor's Township Harvard Business Review case study. And she laughed and she said, and most case studies aren't done when everything's great. We don't want to be the Radnor Township case study. And this has turned out to be the pilot right here, the mothership of errors in the process, of everything coming back to you, the silos and the bifurcated decision making. And this is too important, way too important. And my question to you, and I'm going to stop now, is that Oh, I have one other thing. We can barely get through the streets when it snows. How are we going to handle all the winter construction? And what rules? If there's snow and you can't get through and there's big gigantic piles and we have a bad winter, Mr. Holloway have to stop spending? Is he going to have to incur the cost of not being able to do his construction? There is so much. Plus, I came from areas where we did lots of construction, and most of the time, you know what we were doing? Buying everybody tires. And you touched on it. You were fabulous because it's a nightmare, and this spot's going to be a nightmare. So we better talk about things like what do we do in the snow? And lastly, we didn't talk about alternatives. Have you really explored all the alternatives? I was a dedicated, in fact, my neighbors were ticked off at me. I am a strong supporter of underground garages. I mean, from where I come from, that's what you're using. I think they are the best thing in the world. And I was a strong supporter of this one until we started examining the facts, and I realized it doesn't work in this scenario. And that's what I used to do for a living. You let the facts drive the decision. You don't let yourself want it so badly you forget it, forget the facts. It doesn't work here. If you wanted to do it differently, get a 99-year lease swap on the boulevard and give him the ground underneath across the street where that cement, where it's already paved, and build it under there and under the street into the mansion. I mean, there's stuff that could be done. You can still get underground garages. Sounds impossible. Nothing's impossible if you're creative. But the point is, it doesn't work in this spot.
Would you like us to see, would you like to see above ground parking?
No. I think what's happened,
Well,
I think
you don't want it, want it below ground, you don't want it above ground. Where do you want it?
Let me answer your question. What I want you to do is look at the fact that in an urban environment, you don't need 2 spaces per condo. And I have probably about 200 pages of research. I would be glad to provide you, Jim.
So you would be in favor of an above ground parking lot, but not 24 spaces?
Yeah, I think
right?
what you should do, if you conform with what research has indicated, is what we call adjacent historic districts, and there's a huge amount of information on that. An adjacent district is defined as one that is urban-based. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to make this a suburban location. You're trying to compare it to Wayne suburbia. It's not. It's urban. And although people indicate they're kind of, cynical about the fact a lot of people walk and don't drive cars, believe me, and I've said it over and over again, I came from a 3-car garage. I have 1 car left, and I fill it up once a month when I live here. When I go to Chicago, I have to fill it up once a week. That's what we're after. The rule of thumb now, and if you compare and you look at the research, and even if you look at downtown Philadelphia, and I will be glad to give it to you because I've got file after file over 9 months, is that the appropriate decision here is that you only need 1 car per unit to make it saleable. I completely disagree with the market analysis that you have to have 2 cars in this environment. I do agree that a lot of people don't realize that till they move into it, like me. And then what you could do is wait. You want an alternative for 2nd car? Figure out a way to protect them under 1 car and do what a lot of creative towns do. Now negotiate with the township to guarantee parking across the street in that parking lot that's empty all the time, so that they can have 2-car parking, 1 protected and the other the 2nd car. I did that when I was in Boston. I got 1 car in the garage, and if there was another car in the family, we had to the city would sell us a place that wasn't covered. There are so many alternatives we haven't looked at. So that's where I am. I think you need to go back to the drawing board, and please, because you are the creme de la creme of this, because you can see the difference in the informed position. We got to do it right. We still believe we want to renovate that mansion, but we don't want to run out of money on a green roof and an underground garage and then make it the plastic hotel. It's costly. Look at the numbers. Bring an expert in. Share them. And I know he's got his, who the hell does she think she is, look on his face. Well, I'm a neighbor, and I got rights. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, well, I think we finished up with our public comment. We've had our discussion. You have a long list of things to add into the conditions and notes for the next time. And I think we've reached a comfort level on where we stand on the waivers. So, moving right along, we can, pardon? Back to Don for number G, which is the introduction.
So I move the introduction of ordinance 2012-01, amending chapter 280 of Radnor Township Code.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Now, this is the introduction of an ordinance. John Rice, will you just give us a very brief explanation of why this is in front of us?
As the board may recall, you adopted a municipal curative amendment resolution some 5 months ago to address a court decision that requires you to provide specifically for a bed and breakfast use. Planning Commission had a couple different versions of this, but ultimately what they've settled on is to permit the use within the WBOD and the Agricultural Conservation District by special exception. There's a list of criteria under Article 4 of this proposed amendment, which deals with parking, what other uses are permissible, et cetera. So this is just introduction tonight. Assuming the board authorizes this to move forward, it would then be advertised for the next available meeting. It's got to be advertised twice. You're probably looking at this to come back for enactment at your first meeting in February.
John, I have a question for you on item F on page 2. I don't know if there's an item F other places. Let me know when you get there.
F?
It says parking space for each employee. How is the owner defined as an employee?
Good question.
Thank you.
Well, you have a single-family dwelling parking requirement, and this would be in a single-family dwelling, so you have that. And then on top of that, the way I would interpret this, Kevin, is they're additional. Any employee that's working there, not living there, full-time, part-time, whatever that would be, you would have that, and then you would have to have one for each guest room. So you're going to add a single-family dwelling, and I don't know what that is off the top of my head. Whatever that is, it's probably geared to the number of bedrooms, but there would be some basic single-family dwelling parking requirement also.
I'll defer to you, but it would make me feel more comfortable based on your answer that if you put something in front of that said subject to, the residential parking requirements or something like that to avoid confusion.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I agree. That ought to be clarified, and I don't know whether that came up in front of the Planning Commission. I was at one of those meetings, and I don't recall that coming up, but just so we have clarity going forward, I think if the board's inclined to move this forward, you can do that, subject to that being clarified in the amendment itself before it gets advertised.
Okay. Any other commissioner comment?
My only comment would be about the procedure for that. What has to happen to do what you just said?
Well, what I'll do is let me talk with Dave and Peter Nelson, who did most from my office. It went to most of the Planning Commission meetings where this was discussed. I just want to see if they addressed it. I don't see it specifically in here. My interpretation would be there's a single-family dwelling parking requirement, so you would add those all up. But I'll get an answer. I will notify the commissioners. Here's the answer. I'm going to tweak this amendment in some fashion to deal with that, and then we'll advertise it for your February meeting.
As an introduction again, would that change, or are we still introduced tonight?
I think you can introduce it tonight with the caveat that that issue gets clarified, however that needs to be clarified, whether it's in this amendment that this gets tweaked, or maybe there's another answer, Kevin. I don't know off the top of my head how they treated that particular issue.
Again, you're the expert. To me, it looked like it was a potential risk.
John, is this something we can change now? Or would it have to go back to planning again if we change it now?
I think you can make that I mean, you're basically, you want to make sure that all the parking requirements are in there for the residents. It's got to be in a single-family dwelling. For the number of guest rooms, because those folks that are going to be in the guest rooms are going to have cars, assumedly, and for employees. So you're going to add those up. There's just no calculation in this amendment, and I'm sure there's nothing in your existing ordinance that's clear on that issue, and I think we should clear it up.
It seems substantive to me, and it doesn't seem like something that we should, I don't know if others feel differently, that we should approve tonight without knowing the particulars of it. Do you disagree, John? It just seems rather substantive.
We're not approving the ordinance tonight. I think we're just approving.
Yeah, but it's being advertised in the form that John's going to select that we're not going to see before it's advertised.
Tonight's for introduction. You have another meeting in 2 weeks. We'll bring it back and you can introduce it that night. And I think we're still within the time guidelines that we have to meet.
Okay, so will there be action tonight on it then?
No, I mean, what I would suggest you do, since this may get tweaked, however it gets tweaked, once I get the answer to Kevin's question, I would table it tonight, and then we'll bring it back in 2 weeks with whatever the answer is to the parking criteria.
I may have missed, Kevin, your concern is with F? Is it 280.115.3F? Is it Frank?
The bottom of page 2, it says a parking space for each employee. And it seems to be that, you know, some of these businesses, the employees they won't be employees, they'll be owners. And
right,
it just seems
And
a
B,
potential risk.
and B in the same, and this is why I think you apply the single-family dwelling parking. B says that this is an accessory use to a single-family dwelling and shall be subordinate. So I think you have to add all those parking requirements up. I just don't know in those two districts. I assume they're the same for a single-family dwelling, but let's make it clear so that because these are special exceptions, so the zoning hearing board they know precisely, and any applicant knows precisely how many spaces are needed.
In other code segments, we limit the number of employees in home occupations and whatnot. Is this, when we say one parking space per employee, do we limit the number of employees that can work in the B&B in this ordinance?
No.
So that's another element that we may want to look at, is capping the number of employees, because we cap the number of employees in home occupations.
How do you propose to do that?
Well, for instance, in the home occupation, I believe we allow, generally it's the owner occupant of the home plus one, I think it's one employee. That meaning one commuting employee. In this case, we have possibly the owner occupant of the B&B, but what if they have a hired chef who wants to come in and cook breakfast in the morning? Do we allow that? What if they want to have a chef and a cleaning person? What if they want to have a chef, a server and a cleaning person? So the question is, what does it look like? So, what are the limits we're going to put in?
Yeah, but how do you know that until you know how large one of these facilities is?
The fact that it exists in a residential neighborhood, we should have the right to limit the staff the same way we limit the number of employees in home occupation.
Home occupation is also considered an accessory use. I'm not sure that permits any employees, according to the definition. I'm reading from the definition of the zoning ordinance.
I thought it allowed for one, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I can look at, and I guess I'm wondering if I guess it depends on how large the facility is. You might have a cleaning person. What if they have...
It'll depend on loads. It'll depend on how big it is. You have shifts. You got...
you probably not... You may have I'm assuming that the occupant will be primarily doing most of the cooking and things, but you don't know. You may have outside amenities. You may have a pool. you may have something like that also that may involve, probably not employees, but service personnel on site. Why don't I, between now and 2 weeks from now, I'll look at that. And the thing I want to just caution the board is you have 6 months to adopt something. So
6 months starting from when?
from the date of the municipal cure resolution,
And when was that?
August 22nd.
August, okay.
So we introduce next meeting.
February
Approve
20
30 days
February
later.
22nd.
We had a motion on the floor. Does somebody want to move to table?
Yeah, I'll move that we table this to the next meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion to table carries 6-0. All right, next moving. Oh, excuse me. Jim Higgins was not here, so it was 5-0. Moving along to Finance and Audit, John Fisher is now the chair of that subcommittee. Would you like to introduce this item?
I have to find it. I got paperclip to. Yeah. We have the disbursements for approval, bill list 2012-1A in the amount of $1,048,076.40. It's been reviewed by staff. All the payments and went through the same purchase order process and charge against the 2012 budget as adopted by the Board of Commissioners December 12th. However, there's some other verbiage here. Bill White, do you want to just explain the purpose of that?
Sure. The description changed a little bit with this disbursement list because we have we have 2 different years in play and several different categories of expense in play. So just wanted to step through and identify the various areas that are being affected. First of all, a large percentage of the expenditures that are included in this list were expenses that were incurred in 2011, were approved through the purchase order in 2011 and carried forward into the 2012 year. So we wanted to make sure that that was identified for anyone who's reading, that those purchases were approved last year and they're just being expended in 12. At the same time, there are some 12 expenses that are being paid here. And then the final piece is the debt and the payroll and the other electronic payments that are included on the separate schedule. So without going into...
So I'll move to approve the bill list 2012-1A.
I second it.
Is there any commissioner comment?
Yes, I need to recuse myself on the items involving Office Basics, Inc.
I have a few comments. Very first, page 0, if you will. There's a note there for a saldo mailing. I'm assuming that we recouped that from the applicant?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Page 2. Under buildings and grounds, there's an item for electricity for the Maplewood floodgate. Now, I'm sure I've seen this before and just didn't key on it, but isn't that for the benefit of the swim club?
That's something I'll have to take a look at and get back to you on. I don't know off the top of my head.
On page 4, there's a payment to Martin Limestone for ball field clay. Just want to make sure that that is only for Radnor Township ball fields.
Commissioner Nagel, that ball field clay was actually installed probably October.
Okay.
So at that point, we were taking care of all ball fields.
Right. Thank you. And under rec programs, there's a payment to the school district, and it says transportation for Radnor. This is on page 5, but it doesn't, there's some truncated.
Yes.
What is that?
That was transportation associated with the day camp program.
We're just now paying it?
Yes.
Making money off the float, huh, Bill? Yeah. That's all I have.
Any other commissioner comment? Do we have any public comment? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. So it passes it passes 6-0 with noted that Don has recused himself from the office basics. All
No
right.
further report.
Public Works and Engineering. Jim Higgins, would you like to introduce the item on the agenda?
Thank you. We have a resolution, 2011-148, pertaining to the Skunk Hollow Farm and the upcoming growing season, 2012. If I could talk a minute about what's going on here. We have a wonderful resource in the township called Skunk Hollow. Not a very whimsical name, but we have in addition to that, we have a great organization, the Radnor Conservancy, which is a 501c3 charity, which has approached the township and asked if it could be the lessee, or rather the licensee, this is not a lease, it's a license, of 32 garden plots at Skunk Hollow Park for the purpose of working a community garden. And the organization, Radnor Conservancy, has contacted another organization called the Skunk Hollow Community Garden Association. And so in order for the Conservancy to have this organization work the community garden, they need the township's official okay in the form of a license agreement to enter into. And I can explain that in a moment, but before I do that, it might be helpful if one of the directors of the Radnor Conservancy come forward, Leslie Bowes, who lives on Fenimore Lane, for the purpose of educating us a little bit more about the community garden concept.
Hi, Jim. Thanks very much. Leslie Bowes. I'm a Radnor resident and the executive director of the Radnor Conservancy. I'm really excited to be here. This is, I think, a really exciting project, and I wish I could take credit for it on behalf of the Conservancy, but unfortunately I can't. This is the brainchild of some Radnor residents who noticed that once the Skunk Hollow Farm project had concluded, there was still some significant and valuable infrastructure on the site. And we were approached by this group of residents who really didn't have any corporate structure or organizational structure of their own, and asked if we would support them in their endeavor to establish a community garden over there, which obviously they needed some organization that would be able to procure insurance and work with the township and be somebody that the township could actually contract with. So we are proposing just to be sort of the scaffolding for this other group. It's, it's sort of a grassroots, and they're just getting started, although this is not their first experience with community gardens. I'm just going to turn it over to the one of the two organizers of the group that is going to be running this thing. Our role will be minimal. We're just, as I said, the scaffolding for this great grassroots effort. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Leslie, just to be clear, because I think you touched on a couple of my questions, because there's a statement in here that says the township understands that the community garden will be administered by the Skunk Hollow Community Garden, unaffiliated with the Conservancy. Since they're really not a real legal entity, you've stepped in to secure the insurance and sort of manage the legal relationship.
We think this is a great project. This is exactly the kind of project that the Conservancy wants to support, and we think it's going to build community. It's, locavore, local food. As a matter of fact, when the CSA was in operation, we had a lot of inquiries because people thought they mistook it for a community garden and thought, well, God, that would be a great thing to do. So when that project wrapped up, this looked like a great.
Who's monitoring the registration list? So that
the grassroots group.
So Sarah, will you guys get the list of this form that's at the back that says Skunk Hollow Community Garden Release? You'll get that from everybody. Will you pass that on to the Conservancy, and somebody will provide us a list of who and how many?
As they pay their money, as they commit to a plot, and they pay their rental fee or whatever you want to call it, that'll give us enough capital to get going. They will be required to sign that. And then a copy will stay with the Conservancy, a copy will stay with our files, and a copy will come to the township.
But who will provide, a summary?
Oh, we will.
Who's we?
The Skunk Hollow Community Garden, which at the moment is being spearheaded by Katrina Ogilby and Sarah Pilling, because I've had a lot of experience with it. We have excellent guidelines in the form of the American Gardening Association, which has been around at least since the 70s, and almost anything you need to know about a community gardening or organizing it, you can get from them.
I just want to see a list at the end of the day, how many signed up, and then I want to know, if you got 32 people, that 32 people live in Radnor Township who've done this.
Absolutely, first priority is to Radnor Township folks.
Should be sole priority. It's Radnor Township.
Well, it should be. The only thing that might happen, hear the word might, is that the Haverford College community gardening is going away. And there may be some people there who will request, but they would not come in unless every single plot was not used.
Would you charge a differential fee to non-residents?
That could be. But it says in the lease a maximum of $50, so that might limit us. But we intend it to be all Radnor residents. We are prepared to do a really comprehensive public relations so that we hit more people than have email, more people that have cable. We're going to contact every church, every civic association, in the newspaper, et cetera, so that we can hopefully have a cross-section of income, ethnic, you name it, that this will be a true community garden. And as a community garden, they form and they set the parameters that fits within the structure of the Radnor Conservancy.
I think if I recall correctly, at a prior meeting, you said that the Garrett Hill Group has an existing community.
We set up a community garden last year, and the two holdouts are here. We had many more people came. Yes, it's called the Common Ground Community Garden, and it's located at the Radnor United Methodist Church. And I have some pictures. So
what's going to happen? Are you competing with that? Did that shut down? What happened?
No, there is more than enough room.
So you're saying the plots are all taken up there?
We have pressure right now to enlarge the garden and have written a grant to try and get some more funds for the raised beds. We have people exhibiting interest all the time. That garden may outgrow its space, the request for it. So there is a chart on the table. It doesn't look like it's very easy for you to see. We've taken the existing plot and broken it into 32 spaces. They're 19 feet by 19 feet. If the people who are going to participate will use what I call best practices, and it's not a demand, they will build raised beds, either surrounding it by wood or just mounding it. In this way, you are only watering, growing, feeding, or digging within that space. So there's a lot of land conservation that goes along with it. All the spaces in between are either mulched or grass. Using the fence line, I'll pull out a barren thing, we've left a lot of area here. Between the gate and the fence will be a common area for strawberries and raspberries, all kind of brambles. We did an area down the middle so you didn't have to walk all the way around. And this is one gate, and the other gate is down here, so that everybody's plot will be separated by grass. There'll be access for trucks. The bottom area, there's already an area here designated for youth. There's a sandbox here. There are already flowers in here, and someone has started to plant dwarf fruit trees along here. But what goes in here into the common areas will be determined again by the Community Garden Association. A Community Garden Association consists of all the gardeners who wish to participate. So it's very much of a democratic group process.
I don't know if are you saying somebody could drive their truck all the way up to here?
There is a 10-foot there's a 20-foot gate right over here. So if they wanted to, I can't imagine why they had that, but we certainly weren't going to put beds where there was a gate. They could bring a truck into here.
Oh, Steve, do we let people drive trucks in there?
No.
The public drive trucks in there now?
Now that's locked up right now.
It's locked, and it will stay locked. The only access, Kevin, is actually going to be through this gate and this gate. This is the lower gate. And I will establish a demonstration garden in plot number 25 to use for teaching purposes. Gayla McCluskey was here. She's really excited about this. There are a number of women in Radnor Township who are master gardeners through Delaware County, and they are excited to be able to come in and work with us to give workshops. I mean, I think this thing could explode. I think 32 plots, I suspect, I hope, that we'll actually end up with 64 entities and people will pair up and garden together. If you built raised beds, let me show you quickly. This is a bed at Garrett Hill at Thanksgiving time. And we can find it. This was the garden in the summer. And this is a garden at Thanksgiving time when we're about to put a tent over it. And this bed is chock-a-block full of vegetables. I'm eating out of my one bed, 4 foot by 12 foot, now, and probably will eat until the end of February. And then I'll run out of space. I'll cover it. And in March, I will start again. We have a possibility, depending on climate, that this could become a 10-month of the year gardening process, which is just fabulous for families and for this whole locavore movement where you grow locally and you eat locally and you eat seasonally. So you're not eating strawberries out of this in December. You're eating kale and collards and turnips and arugula and lettuce. I just think it's a fabulous process that I'm really committed to.
Your license doesn't permit you to change the access. It just permits you to use the space.
Right. We're not changing the access.
Okay, you just talked about driving in.
No, I said this is a lane that could be,
okay,
but we're not intending to bring a truck in there.
I've been at events at the mansion where I drove in through the Skunk Hollow utility area,
the back
where
gate.
the leaves are and all.
Right.
You know? And but in Garrett Hill, we had one truckload of dirt.
And it was left in the parking lot, and we moved 10,000 pounds. Is that right, Gene? 10,000 pounds of soil we moved with wheelbarrows from a parking lot through a narrow gate, up a bit of a slope, so it was a push, and into the garden. Mm-hmm. It can be done.
This gate is in there specifically for deliveries of mulch, because we use stuff right out of the leaf mulch when we were doing the other project. But it's not a normal access.
But I just wanted you to see the possibility of what you can do in a garden like this. Is when I built gardens in Chester, there is a formula from the USDA. We calculated that each family ate the equivalent of at least $500 worth of vegetables, and we weren't doing it year-round. So it is a real benefit, an economic benefit, in addition to which it's going to be pesticide-free.
Sarah, I think this is a fantastic project, and I'm thrilled to support it. I'm thrilled to see this particular spot used again. I support anything zealously that works or it seeks to support the continued tradition of agriculture, which is a really important part of our cultural heritage in that part of the township. I'm not the only one that feels that way. It's in our comprehensive plan. It's in a lot of our planning documents. But anything we can do to support and encourage continued agriculture in that area, even if it is this little small plot of 32 plots, I think this is a really great idea. When the CSA started many years ago, it was massively oversubscribed and massively popular. So I know that there is this enthusiasm out there in our community. Unfortunately for that project, that little piece of land just simply is not big enough to support a CSA. No. And until we get more land somehow, some way, that model is not going to work there. This could be a model that really works there. So I'm thrilled to support it. I'm thrilled to see it happen. And I think we need a motion on the table.
Hold on, I have a couple of things.
Okay.
Can you just estimate the number of members? A handful to 60 sounds like you could have as many as 60 members.
We could have as family units.
Yes.
That could be one person. It could be a family of 5.
Did you have an expectation of membership at this point, or is that still?
It would be lovely to have 64 family units gardening there this summer. I don't exactly count on that. I think there may be people who are cautiously interested and sort of stand back through the first year, and when they see how it goes, the next year they're just right there.
So comfortable, so you think there would be in the order of dozens of people that would have an interest in this?
I think so, yes. And we already have a list of between 10, I believe, 10 and 15
I just
people.
want a sense of the popularity. That's sufficient.
It's very popular.
Very good. And then this question would be for Leslie and John. We talked about the restoration provisions, and I understood that the Conservancy is willing to maintain the restoration provisions from the existing contract.
This has to do with the fence.
Yes.
And the well. There's been a couple versions of this. You should have a copy of the lease, which has a revision date of January 9th, 2012 in the upper right-hand corner.
License?
License.
I don't have that, John, so, obviously, there's one up here that was.
Yeah, there's a couple, because there were some changes that I received by email Friday, I did this morning, and paragraph 8 was added to the original draft that went out last week. And it basically, the Conservancy agrees to remove the fence and/or cap the well during the term of the license. So over the next year, that's taken out of the original lease. That's the exact language that was in that original, the second lease, which was March of 2010. That was added. So that's in there.
So my version doesn't show that, but
yeah, you should have both of them.
And it was emailed to us today.
right. But I wasn't in a position to get it and print it and read it today. So, all right. Well, I'm.
Yeah.
While Don's looking at that, can I ask you one question, John? Item 2, the second paragraph, on or before December 1, 2012. It says they have the right to renew the agreement for 1 year or shall have the right to assign the license with the consent of the township. Does the consent of the township apply to both provisions? Or is the right to renew for 1 year essentially a unilateral right that they have?
Well, I think the township's going to have to consent.
Okay.
On any extension.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have anything?
Can I just, I hate to do this, but there were couple words were missed in this January 9th draft when we added paragraph 8, and I just want to put them out on the record. They're not substantive. In paragraph 1, the second paragraph, where it says Skunk Hollow Community Garden, the Garden Association, there's 3 words that were dropped out in front of unaffiliated. It should say an unincorporated association unaffiliated with the Conservancy. So those 3 words need to be added. And in paragraph 2, and I received these from counsel for the Conservancy late this afternoon. In paragraph 2, the second paragraph, there should be, in the second line where it says renew this agreement for 1 year, there should be a period there. And then the next sentence should read, the Conservancy shall also have the right to assign a license agreement to the Garden Association.
Well, that's different than the way you answered my question then.
With the consent.
By inserting the period, it's a unilateral right.
Right.
We said it was.
Well, we can, the way it was originally done, that's.
Well, let's make it bilateral.
Make it, I mean, my recommendation, the conversation has always been, this is a 1-year agreement, and then they've got to come back to this board. So, so either one of those are going to need to consent. So I'm going to need to.
And the board has to vote, like next year, it has to come back to us. The board has to vote again.
Right.
So it really sunsets after 1 year, but they have the right to renew.
Not if the contract says on or before they have the.
Kevin
right
wants to
do it.
make sure there's not an automatic renewal.
Right.
And
I respect that.
That's fine. And I think that's been the intent. The only other slight edit is on the signature line where that title should be Vice President.
It can't be Elaine. There's a type. There's probably some form that somebody
He's
left.
talking about the Conservancy line for.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood it. You're correct. I see.
Right.
Yeah, we approved.
Did you get that?
Because Bill's not here.
Bill has an obligation to sign this document, whether he's here or not, John?
No, I'm signing
No,
everything from tonight.
The sitting
Vice President, who's ever at the
Acting
meeting,
president.
right, would fill in. So, I mean, other than that,
John, the insurance should be a comprehensive general policy. CGL, not comprehensive policy. It's insurance speak, but it has meaning.
in paragraph 5,
5, yeah,
Inserted in 5.
comprehensive general liability. I was just going to explain, everything's been discussed, I think, but basically it's a 1 year. There can be a membership fee of $50 charged for expenses, and if there's anything left over, you reimburse us. The Conservancy reimburses us for the electricity that's supplied.
Yes.
There's a reciprocal indemnification running to us and running to the Conservancy, covering breach of contract, tort claims, and violations of law. And we already talked about the fence and the water well, so that's it.
Okay.
I move the passage of the license with the attached.
The resolution.
I move the resolution, sorry, with the attached license and the attachment to that, which is the Skunk Hollow Community Garden release,
And with the changes as we just
with the
discussed.
changes made by John.
And do we need to summarize? I'm sorry.
That's it.
You want to summarize changes?
I
That's
can,
part
I
of your
can go.
motion.
I mean, I can go through them. Under paragraph, the second paragraph, under section 1, the words an unincorporated association are to be inserted in front of the word unaffiliated in that first sentence. In the second paragraph of section 2, there would be a period after renew this agreement for 1 year, then a period, for 1 year with the consent of the township, then a period. And then the second sentence in that paragraph 2 of section 2 would read, the Conservancy shall also have the right to assign the license agreement to the Garden Association with the consent of the township. So both of those are going to be with the consent of the township. Commissioner Higgins' revision was in paragraph 5, the first line, the word general be inserted between comprehensive and policy. And then the signature line to reflect Vice President signing the license agreement itself.
Okay, do we have a second
I
for the motion?
have a
with those
question
changes?
based on Jim's comment, though.
Second.
This language in paragraph 4 doesn't establish a hierarchy the way he described it. So, is there a hierarchy?
You're talking about reimbursement by the Conservancy of their own costs and then
Well, it says basically
reimbursement of our electricity costs?
Correct, because now we're potentially incurring additional expenses on our part to subsidize this activity, because it says that the fees collected will be used for the community guard, for maintaining the community garden, for insurance costs, and for reimbursement to the township of any electricity. So I don't know what cost the association would have, but then the implication being, okay, the next level of reimbursement is to the Conservancy for their insurance costs, and we're last in line. That's how I potentially read that. There's no,
Agreements with the Conservancy.
But
but it says we're paying for the electricity.
Hang on. The pump is wired to the electricity on the mansion, and it's not separately metered, or it is?
My recollection is that it is separately
So we can have
metered.
full accountability of that. Hey, you know what? I'll kick in the electric. I'll pay for it. I got it.
Let me say.
Can we document that in the minutes,
I
please?
get paid $2,000 a year. I can cover it.
John, I appreciate that. We will, can I intersperse something? Because we're going to use best practices, one of the things we will be gathering is 55-gallon plastic drums. The water from the well will be pumped into the drums, and then by gravity, the people will attach hoses to water their garden. I calculate there's about 125. If the barrels were full, each garden would get about 125 gallons a week, which they don't need. So it's not like the electric pump is going to run all the time. Depending on how much it rains, et cetera, the electricity is going to be used only at odd intervals. I do not see us running up an electric bill. We're not having any parties there at night.
But you seem to have free power, so I would.
I know I do.
I mean, I wouldn't fight
You
it.
think I would have offered if I knew it was going to be a big bill?
I wouldn't fight it. I'd take
In
it.
Garrett Hill, we're using rain barrels, and there's virtually no electricity.
All in favor of John paying the electricity, sir?
Okay. I'm on record here, so I got it. Up to $1,000.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. Is there any more commissioner comment?
Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Can
For
I
this,
get
and
one last
well,
thing?
and I want to thank also the Conservancy
Oh, yeah,
for stepping up
for a
and giving you the umbrella that you need.
Not that anybody would be awake at 10:33. I want to thank my loyal friends who came, and I want to announce that there'll be an instructional, informational, and sign-up meeting on Saturday, February 18th at 1 o'clock at the library. And we will be getting that word out, but I wanted a little bit of the free press while I was there. Thank you very much.
Great.
Sarah, thank you. Thank you all. Really, great job.
Now we'll open it up for public comment. The first thing I'd like to read into the record, we got a letter today from Ricky Peterson, and it's a very short, so I'm going to read it. Both Hank Wilson and I are writing to support the board in choosing to create the Skunk Hollow Community Gardens, as we cannot attend the Board of Commissioners meeting this coming week. We are currently members of the Garrett Hill Community Garden and have discovered a whole new world of those interested in organic gardening and being friends, something unusual today. Our association with the Radnor Methodist Church has produced land, a sense of community caring, and a new church member. Radnor needs more people to become involved in the community. The gardens will be one avenue. Please let the gardens concept continue with your support. Ricky Peterson. Okay. Any other public comment? Yes. Hello, Dan.
Dan Cherry, Wayne. Good evening, all. I'll just preface my remarks. Been told not to play with this microphone too much. But for purposes of this presentation, it's probably going to be easier for me just to present to my left. The reason why I say that is, as many people may know, We currently have 2 commissioners on the board that, at least in the past 5 years, served in high-ranking officer capacities for the Radnor Conservancy. That's Elaine Paul Schaefer and John Nagel. And as our new commissioner of the First Ward, Jim Higgins, pointed out, he's a strong supporter of the Radnor Conservancy. He wrote a fairly lengthy support letter for Elaine Paul Schaefer's campaign a couple years ago, detailing all the things that he thought were laudable about that organization. So when I come here and I speak about this latest attempt by the Conservancy to do something contractual with the Skunk Hollow ground, I'd like to direct my comments to people that I hope may have an open mind to what I have to say. By way of brief background, this is something in terms of the Skunk Hollow, well, now whatever it's called, and the Willows Cottage. It's something I've looked at since at least calendar year 2009. It's now 2012, and every year, the Radnor Conservancy has come before this board asking for lease amendments, changes, ratifications of past behavior, etc. I think that's fairly strong evidence that you're either dealing with an entity that is not competent, or alternatively can't present you with a good model in terms of what they intend to do. I was amused at the contention that the CSA has wound down over at Skunk Hollow. I don't recall in the past year any presentations by the Radnor Conservancy as to why the CSA project wound down. And if, in fact, that did happen, please correct me. But I don't recall that occurring. Here's what I recall occurring. Greener Partners walking away from the CSA project. Okay? Some people might call that winding down. I call it evidence that the project was a failure. It was a failure. Okay? You had pre-season shares that were offered to the public, and for whatever reason, the Conservancy couldn't make it work. Couldn't make it work for multiple years. As a result, I think it's dangerous to start entering into more contracts with this group for use of our public open space. It's our public open space. It's not ground that the Conservancy owns. Okay, the Conservancy, for use of the Willows Cottage and all of the ground at Skunk Hollow, which we all own, it's Radnor Township property, they pay $1 a year. $1 a year. They still haven't gotten anything right in terms of running that farm. But here's what they have done. Here's what we know about in terms of the running of it. We know that over at the Willows Cottage, there was a smart car raffle that violated Pennsylvania Small Games of Chance. We know that. Okay? Here's also what we know. We know that the use of the Willows Cottage in terms of selling cheeses and eggs, all types of poultry, was outside the provisions of the then existing contract. We know that. Contract the Conservancy holds with the Township. Here's also what we know. We know that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania donated $250,000 to the Willows Cottage restoration on the false premise, the then false premise, that a farmer was going to be living there. That's, again, just in the past 4 years. And now, again, after their farmers have walked off site, ended their relationship, the Conservancy comes before you again and asks you to enter into another contract with them. I don't know, for you 3 gentlemen, what your measure of competence is in terms of what you are looking for, in terms of the Radnor Conservancy presenting you with some type of a result. But it can't possibly be every year they come before you asking for you to enter into another contract. And I applaud Commissioner Higgins for recognizing that there was, at least until recently rewritten, a right of renewal, another 2-year contract for the Radnor Conservancy regarding this ground. After the CSA failed, one would expect any responsible organization to come before this board and explain exactly what happened. Why, after they had been given this incredibly generous gift of multiple acres of Radnor Township land, why it didn't work. And that never occurred. I don't know why. But I do know that any organization that fails to do that is not an organization that wants to be held accountable. It appears to be an organization that wants to continue to operate because it has people on the board that view it not through rose-colored glasses, but with complete blinders. can't possibly do wrong. I would hope that somebody would have recognized in this lease agreement, this proposed lease agreement, it wasn't brought up during Commissioner comment, that in fact in paragraph 2, the first paragraph in paragraph 2, is an escape clause. Talked about people being really interested in it, then why in paragraph 2 does it state, quote, the terms of this license shall commence on January 1st, 2012 and shall expire on December 31st, 2012. That's a term of 1 year, provided, however, that in the event the community garden is not in operation by May 1st, 2012, 5 months from now, the Conservancy shall have the right to terminate this license at any time thereafter upon not less than 30 days' notice to the Township. Why have that in there? Why come before this board and ask to, in effect, redo the lease yet again with no list of people who are interested in doing this project, without even attempting to enter that into the record or provide it before the board? I don't understand that sense of entitlement. I really don't. I particularly don't understand that sense of entitlement when there's no discernible record to speak of. This board has been very patient by and large with the actions over at what is effectively the land you all control, the Willows, Skunk Hollow, Willows Cottage. I'm surprised, legitimately surprised, in the past year there wasn't some push by some person on this board to have at least an update from the Conservancy as to what is going on over there. I mean, do any of you right now appreciate the status that the cottage itself is in, what the Conservancy is currently doing there, where they are in terms of their renovations? Has anybody come before you and given you that update? Or the Friends of the Willows Cottage, the spin-off that I had heard multiple years ago was actually going to be taking over the lease. I guess that's not going on. But now another group, another spin-off. I don't wish to belabor the point. I will add that I think that the idea of a community garden where it's people actually tilling the soil rather than a Greener Partners farmer tilling the soil is a good thing. I think it may be the right decision for that ground, which now has a very large deer fence erected around it and sits vacant. However, that's something that this board can make a decision about, or direct perhaps Parks and Rec or some other board to make the decision on. There's no reason to continue to enter into these types of contracts with the Radnor Conservancy. Why do that? Why allow them to have this type of authority or discretion? They haven't earned that. A few other things with respect to the Skunk Hollow farm by and large. I don't know whether or not anybody has given a presentation as to when the CSA, to use the expression of the Conservancy president, wound down. It has been for some time. And I don't know when this idea of starting a community garden was first presented. One thing, however, that does deeply concern me is the fact that we do have this lease, and from Solicitor Rice's remarks, it appears that this was something, again, drafted up to by the Conservancy and provided to the Township with, it sounds like, de minimis Township involvement in terms of the drafting. Remember, you're the landlords of this property. You truly are. The fact that there isn't more involvement in terms of creating a contract that represents this township's interest, whether it be making clear what a right of renewal is. I mean, I was just flabbergasted when I heard, well, it's a right of renewal, but the township has a say. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, that's internally inconsistent. Okay, that's first-year law school stuff. Okay, the fact that that wasn't picked up by somebody is disgraceful. Truly is. The fact that nobody thought it necessary to address the presenters and say, you say you have all of this support, why is it that 5 months from now you're able to void this lease unilaterally if you don't in fact have the support, is, in my opinion, in dereliction of your responsibility of township resources. You owe it to people to ask these questions to the extent township property is being involved. This isn't a small parcel. This is a large parcel, and this isn't a situation in which a group is just getting its feet wet in terms of the project. Again, this is, I believe, the 4th or 5th year the Conservancy has had this involvement. Clearly, at least the plurality of this board, as well as your comments, Commissioner Fisher, is in support of this new lease. I really would hope that some benchmarks would start to be established by this board for continued use of township resources. It sets a very dangerous precedent to allow this behavior by the Conservancy and the other spin-off groups with respect to this parcel. I can't think of any group that could possibly have the bar set lower for it to the extent they want to come in and use township resources. All they would have to do is point to the Conservancy's behavior at Skunk Hollow and the Willows Cottage and say, we can do better than that. And you'll have no right to deny them at that point.
For your comments.
Actually,
not quite finished.
John and Leslie, there's actually, based on Dan's comments, there's an inconsistency, I think, in the agreement. This license becomes effective on January 1st, 2012, which has passed. And it says the Conservancy shall provide and maintain a comprehensive policy of liability insurance. Do you have the policy in place?
We maintained insurance on the property up through December 31st of 2011 because we were still the leaseholders on the property. We didn't renew it because we didn't have a license.
So
we've been trying, this has been brewing for a few months, and
Understood.
we tried to make it a more seamless segue, but we don't. We haven't.
If we approve this tonight, I believe the insurance policy could be retroactive back to the 1st. I mean, I've generally been able to do this.
I'm not. We had a lease on both the cottage and
Right.
the land on the hill, so I think there's going to have to be some. We're not just going to re-up to reinsure a building that's not covered. But we've been working with the same insurance company. I don't think it's going to be a problem to get.
It just seems to me we shouldn't be agreeing to approve a lease, without having that insurance. I mean, most of the time when I do agreements, that's usually an attachment to it.
We didn't want to buy the insurance until after we had the license. But
Kevin, do you think we should
Well, let me interrupt.
John,
Let me interrupt. I want to explain something to you, sir. Since I used to take care of the insurance for the Conservancy, the general insurance rider that they carry, the general insurance policy they carry, covers specifically this kind of activity. Typically, you would then get an additional policy.
The fact is that there is a lease effective on January 1st that says there's going to be insurance, and there is no insurance as of today.
Kevin, until it's approved.
I understand, John, but what we ought to say is, something on here that says within 30 days or something like that.
So can paragraph 2 just be changed? The term of the lease shall commence on the date
February.
of
January
insurance,
12th or January
the date that insurance is.
Or February 1st or something.
bound
That
for
seems
the
fine.
Let's amend that. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Wasn't quite finished with my comments, but
If you could wrap up, it's almost 11 o'clock,
Dan,
and we have some business to
We
finish up
appreciate
with.
I will make sure that I'm
You wrapping
very
up in essence
concise.
of time.
I certainly won't take anywhere near the time that Mr. Holloway took. Again, to the extent now that you're going to be amending the language in this license agreement, perhaps a couple of other things. To the extent you're going to allow, again, the Radnor Conservancy, or whatever this spin-off group is calling itself, to have the ability to void this contract unilaterally. And again, if you read the language of paragraph 2, the term of the license shall commence on January 1st, 2012 and expire on December 31st, 2012, provided, however, in the event that the community garden is not in operation by May 1st, 2012, the Conservancy shall have the right to terminate this license at any time thereafter upon not less than 30 days' notice. Perhaps, maybe this is just a typographical error. It would seem to make sense that if this garden isn't in effect, then the township has the ability to void the contract. Okay? Doesn't that make more sense? That if the garden isn't up and running, you guys get to shut it down? I have no idea why you would want to give that discretion to a group in the event they can't get their act together. How does that possibly benefit the township? I'd be very curious to have somebody explain that to me. Makes no sense.
Dan, that land is not being used in any way by the township at this point. So there really is no value in, and I'm speaking for me anyway, in the township controlling that aspect. If it's in our best interest to help this group do everything they can to make this work, we don't want to be the ones that are cutting them short, of their opportunity. If the Conservancy chooses later in the year, if this garden gets a late start and the Conservancy says, we want to end this agreement, that's fine, because they're a partner in this, and so is the volunteer group that is working with them. So as a commissioner, at least from my standpoint, I don't need that latitude. I don't. Okay, because right now the land is sitting vacant with weeds. So I really don't care.
Agreed. And you know why it's sitting vacant with
Dan,
weeds?
Because you didn't go there and help pick the weeds.
That's
why.
right. I didn't sign up to work for Greener Partners. I didn't. I
volunteer. The students from the middle school volunteered to do that. Why didn't you?
Let's bring this back.
But also on
Dan,
top of that, if we're going to go in terms of no, that was a challenge. Okay, in terms of what students are doing, you do recall that students were involved in participating in an illegal raffle. Remember that in terms of the smart car raffle?
Whatever you want to say. Thank you very much.
No. Okay.
Dan, if you could go ahead and wrap up your comments, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
The comment by Commissioner Fisher that the land has no value. Again, that multiple acres in Skunk Hollow have.
I didn't say value. I said we are not using it in any capacity.
Is that the way that you view open space, sir? As to whether or not it's being used?
I'm not responding to that. Thank you.
Well, and honestly, Commissioner Fisher, I wouldn't respond to that either.
Mr. Shari, let's just wrap up. It's public. It's not cross-examination. We understand.
Mr. Rice, you have no right to interject. No right.
I can interject
None.
whenever I want. When somebody's disrupting the meeting, I will interject.
I yield to Mr.
But you don't have the right to do that.
Make it public comment. We understand you don't like this. And give us your final reason. You said you had one more thing.
But I keep getting interrupted.
One more
that
thing.
Takes time. Okay, no, you don't direct how I conduct myself, Solicitor Rice. You don't. Okay. Again, as I was indicating before I was cut off, any assertion that open space is somehow less valuable, okay, maybe not valueless, but less valuable because it's actually not being used, I find that comment.
What does that have to do with the thing in front of us? Nothing. So your public comments are irrelevant.
I appreciate that comment. I appreciate that you want to make a personal attack. That's fine. Okay, I'm responding directly to a comment made by Commissioner Fisher in terms of how he values Radnor's public space, specifically the space that is currently wasting away in the Skunk Hollow due to past bad practices of the Conservancy and its affiliates.
Thank you for your comments. Any other public comment? I see we have someone else waiting. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Betty Mackey. I know some of the commissioners, and they may or may not know that I am professionally a garden writer and rather well known. But I'm here as a homeowner, and the basics are that here is a site that has already been prepared. Investments have already been made in it. The deer fence is there. The ground has been improved. There's some weeds there, big deal. So are we going to take the fence down and make compost for the municipality on the site again? That's what its former use was, I believe. Or are we going to give the children and families and older people and residents of Radnor Township a chance to have a little space in the sun and grow some fresh food and follow the very important life-saving trend of organic gardening and the knowledge that could be being lost of the historical ways of growing food with the best methods. Now, I am not a current member of the Skunk Hollow Community Garden Association, but the next thing I'm going to do is join it. I really think it would be a shame to let this marvelous opportunity go by. Now, a number of years ago, I was a volunteer at Radnor High School, and I saved the greenhouse. They were going to tear down the Radnor greenhouse. And so I asked a few questions. Of course, I didn't want to embarrass my son, who was a student there, but still, I gave him a year without my presence, and then the science department took me on to be the greenhouse mommy, or whatever you want to call it. And so we put up some posters asking for kids to save the greenhouse and have a greenhouse club. And a number of them did. And they worked so hard that in one afternoon, we took this greenhouse that they were considering a piece of junk. Actually, it was a very worthy Lord and Burnham greenhouse. Cleared out the broken glass with the help of the custodian, cut down a mulberry tree that had grown inside, and some other bits of trash, and lo and behold, in one afternoon, we had a working greenhouse. And then I ran that greenhouse for about 4 years, and finally, the school took it back to have programs for the students of Radnor High, and it's still there. This is a similar opportunity, although it's a lot bigger. 32 plots, possibly 64 families, certainly 32. Now, some concerns have been about the low number of people who have expressed any interest here. No one has even heard of it yet because it doesn't exist yet. There has not been a reason to publicize it and get people to sign up for it. I'm in the community garden club at Wayne, and my garden club alone would happily take over the whole thing. Then one other thing I'll say as an earth-loving and earthy person is that a lot of us have big trees on our properties. I have a huge 200-year-old oak tree in my front yard and my backyard. I can't grow vegetables at my house. I mean, I've a few little things, but I mean, it's pathetic. You need full sun. You need good drainage. You need a lot of things, and they're already there, ready to go at Skunk Hollow, and I hope we will go for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I know it's late, but I just feel, I just feel compelled to say one thing. I'm really proud of the Skunk Hollow CSA and what we established there, and I think that it fulfilled every ounce of its purpose when it was initiated. It was, to classify it as a failure is just inaccurate. It was established for the purpose of determining whether or not community-supported agriculture is a sustainable use of land in Radnor Township, and we proved it in spades. We had 5 applicants for every available space in that CSA. It ran successfully for 2 years. We needed more land in Radnor Township to really make it a more traditional model CSA, but for a pilot program and to make the determination of whether or not it was worth pursuing additional land, that project did exactly what it was supposed to do, and I couldn't be more proud of it. So I don't know Mr. Sherry personally. I don't think he ever attended any of our meetings, but this was not an explosion, it was not a failure, and it was a pretty systematic winding down of the project. So, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor.
I think we need we need another amendment.
Okay.
My existing motion, I think, has been recited and restated. I would like to amend that to require the license to begin not January 1, 2012, but February 1, 2012.
Okay. Can I have a second for that
Second.
amendment? And any comment on that amendment? All right. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. The amendment passes 6-0. Now let's vote on the motion itself, the initial motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-0. All right, let's move on to public safety. And I will be handling this. I am the new chair of that subcommittee. And we are going to tick through these ordinances and changes that all have to do with traffic and parking. The first one is the adoption of Ordinance 2011-28, rescinding Ordinance 1986-05, dated February 10th, 1986, changing the parking restrictions on the 100 block of Poplar Avenue to 2-hour parking from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. except by permit or on Sunday and holidays. Superintendent Colarulo, do you have any comment on this or anything you'd like to say?
Just that it will help officers enforce the parking due to parking being taken up by wait staff in the area.
Okay. Do I have any commissioner comment on this? I'm not sure if I moved. I'll go ahead and move.
Second.
Any commissioner comment? Any public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion passes 6-0. Next, we have the adoption of Ordinance 2011-29, stop signs to be installed on the northwest corner of Harrison Road. I'll move that ordinance is adopted.
Second.
Any comment? No? Any comments from the commissioner? Public comment? Let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-0. Next, we have the sister ordinance to that last one, the adoption of Ordinance 2011-30, stop signs to be installed on the southwest corner of Harrison Road. I'll move the approval of that adoption.
Second.
Any commissioner comment? Any staff comment? Public comment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-0. Next, we have the adoption of Ordinance 2011-31, handicap parking space at 881 Glenbrook Avenue. I'll move for the adoption of that ordinance.
Second.
My ward. My
Make the
ward.
minutes easy.
My
I'm
ward.
trying to make the minutes easy. Thanks, Jen.
Any commissioner comment?
Yes. Let the other commissioners know, and I've asked Bob to look into a process issue with how we do these handicap spaces. From the time staff traffic approved this until tonight, it's been about 4 months. Now, when someone needs a handicap space, that's fairly excessive, but of course the problem is we have to pass it by ordinance. So I just asked Bob to look at the process, see if there's something we can do as an interim measure while it's under consideration, once staff traffic approves it, of course.
Okay. Any other commissioner comment? Any staff comment? Any public comment? Let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-0. Next, we have the adoption of Ordinance 2011-32, amending Ordinance 1987-14, dated May 26, 1987, to read permit parking only from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in Emlyn Tunnel Park. I'll move the adoption of this ordinance.
Second.
Any commissioner comment? Staff comment? Public comment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-0. Finally, we have the adoption of Ordinance 2011-33, amending Ordinance 1986-27 to read permit parking only, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. on Glenbrook Avenue. I'll move the adoption of the ordinance.
Second.
Any commissioner comment?
Just so everybody knows, currently it's 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. We're backing it up to 6 p.m., which is consistent with pretty much around the township.
Okay. Any staff comment? Public comment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes 6-0. Now we'll move on to Parks and Recreation. Do you have anything to report, Commissioner Nagel?
Only that there is a Parks and Rec meeting Thursday. I'd encourage people to attend or watch it on TV.
Okay. And for Library, that's my committee, and I have nothing to report. Public Health, Commissioner Fisher, do you have anything to report?
No report.
And Personnel and Administration, Commissioner Kevin Higgins, do you have anything to report? Okay. Any old business?
We just have this January 18th Stormwater Management Plan meeting, and I think I just want to make sure that that's advertised.
And email will go out tomorrow to
Okay.
all those residents who signed up that participated in a lot of the meetings, as well as we will ask commissioners and through your email system too as well to be able to put that notice out. It will be posted on the website and cable as well.
And Bob, is that going to be an official Board of Commissioners meeting? where we'll have a quorum, or is it more of a presentation by the Chagrin Valley?
It'll be a Board of Commissioners meeting, which will be advertised on Wednesday in the newspaper, so it'll be a formal meeting in which discussion can take place.
Thank you.
Any other old business? Any new business?
Madam President, if I may, I'd just like to recognize the Public Works staff on an excellent job they did with leaf collection this year. Seeing some of the mountains that were put out there and the work that they did and work through weather conditions and that, just wanted to recognize the staff for an excellent job that they did do.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Zinkowski. I'll pass that on.
Any other new business? Any public participation? Mr. Gammer.
Baron Gemmer, South Wayne Avenue. I will be extremely brief. Two quick comments. Going back to some points that were discussed. The 500-foot major man-made structures discussion. First, I'd like to thank Stephen Rossini for bringing that up and the discussion itself. Secondly, just as a little context, at least from my observation, that was not waived in the past. It was just basically ignored by and large. I don't know the extent that anything was ever included in the packet. So it's basically to the extent that we would follow it as necessary is good, but it wasn't even looked at, just to give a little context there. Secondly, actually another point I think that Commissioner Nagel had brought up about the subdivision, not the Luella, but the one before that with the no development on the new land. One of the questions I have about those, and they don't come up that often though, but because there's no development going on, planning kind of just says, okay, make sure lot areas, et cetera. Are we not kind of losing our bite at the apple there for sidewalks and street trees? Because now that lot can get developed as an independent residence and we don't have that opportunity anymore. It's not going to go through subdivision. It's just a single residence. And it may not be as applicable in this case given the location and the fact that it's only one other lot, but it has happened in other cases. So when those get sold off, we don't have any control over them as they get developed individually. So if that's something we could look into to make sure that if we want those sidewalks, want those street trees, and actually there's some other things in Sal, though, that have a little more stricter requirements than just zoning, which would kick in under normal development. I think that would be useful. I'd hate to lose that opportunity because we weren't thinking about it at the time. So.
Baron, isn't the time to do that at planning, though?
It is, but unfortunately, planning doesn't have that mindset. Actually, I was talking with Susan Stern about that too, and I think she might even come in next meeting to talk about that in relation to this other plan. But you're right.
Nothing for us to do. It's really to make that point at planning and make your argument carry the day at planning. And I think you'd find it receptive here if you did. That's why.
No, you're right. In this one, it's obviously to you already, so it's too late for planning, but you are correct. Planning needs to have that mindset that just because there's no development, they still need to look at these other aspects because they, in all likelihood, are not going to get another shot at it because most of these places can't be subdivided again. So you are correct. Thank you.
Any other public comment? All right. Somebody want to move to adjourn?
The motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hallelujah.